The first time Rosamund Vale heard her husband curse her name, she was standing with her hand already lifted to knock. England, 1854. The hour was close to midnight in the Mayfair house of the Duke of Alder-mere, and every respectable drawing-room in London had long since put out its candles. Yet the lamp beneath Lucian Vale's study door still burned in a hard gold line across the corridor carpet, sharp as a blade. Rosamund had crossed the quiet house with a leather folio pressed against her ribs and a small cracked ivory piano key hidden in the pocket of her dark blue gown. The folio held numbers, signatures, rents, and warnings. The piano key held the last memory of her mother's hand, guiding hers across a country pianoforte, years before anyone had taught Rosamund how silently a duchess was expected to suffer. She had not meant to listen. A duchess did not linger outside closed doors. A wife did not eavesdrop upon her husband. A woman raised as Lady Rosamund Vale, daughter of the Earl of Penrith, had been trained from childhood to stand straight, speak gently, and never appear where she was not wanted. But she heard her own name before her knuckles touched the panel, and the sound of it, spoken in Lucian's low-controlled voice, stopped her breath. "Rosamund has made a fool of this house," he said. "Don't soften it, Aunt. I've seen the letter." Rosamund stood very still. Inside the study, there was the faint clink of glass, then the smoother, older voice of Lady Maud Kersey, widow, aunt, and self-appointed guardian of all that remained proper in the House of Vale. "My dear boy, I would never soften a truth merely because it is unpleasant. A wife may be forgiven vanity. She may be forgiven foolish sentiment, but betrayal of a family's interests is another matter entirely." Rosamund's fingers tightened on the folio until the leather bent. Betrayal. The word was so absurd that for one strange second she almost smiled. That very evening, while the guests at Lady Crampton's music-hall praised Lucian's composure and pitied Rosamund's reserve, she had sat alone in the small morning-room and followed columns of ink through months of estate accounts. She had found rent entered twice, payments routed through a clerk she did not trust, and the same imitation of her own signature beside 3 authorizations she had never written. She had come to Lucian with proof because she was still naive enough, even after 3 years of marriage, to believe that evidence might open a door affection had never unlocked. "She came to me with corrected accounts yesterday," Lucian said. "She said nothing of this. Naturally she did not." Lady Maud's reply was gentle enough to poison tea. A woman does not announce her own scheme before she profits from it. Rosamund closed her eyes. The corridor smelled faintly of beeswax. Extinguished candles, and the white lilies Lady Maud had ordered for the hall, because Rosamund's own preference for lavender was, in her words, too provincial for a ducal residence. Beyond the tall windows, rain had begun to silver the black glass. The household slept. No one would see the Duchess of Alder-mere standing outside her husband's study, with her heart quietly breaking in the dark. "There was a time," Lucian said, and the restraint in his voice hurt more than anger, "when I believed her incapable of deceit." Lady Maud sighed. "Lucian, you wanted to believe that because you are honorable. Rosamund is graceful, she is useful. I never denied either quality. But usefulness in a duchess is not the same as loyalty in a wife." Rosamund looked down at the folio. Her corrected notes lay inside, each page marked in her careful hand. She had written them after dinner, after answering Lady Maud's comments about her pale complexion, after watching Lucian pass her without noticing that she had not eaten. She had dipped the pen 3 times to steady her fingers before writing the final warning. "The signature is mine in shape only. It is not mine in conscience." She had imagined Lucian reading that sentence. She had imagined his brows drawing together, his sharp mind catching what others had missed. She had even allowed herself one foolish hope. Perhaps, for once, he would look at her not as the woman chosen for him by duty, but as the woman who had guarded his name when no one asked her to. The lamp line under the door trembled as someone moved inside. "The letter is damning," Lucian said. "The timing is worse. If word reaches the trustees or the tenants, Alder-mere will become a public jest by morning. Then you must act before morning. Lady Maud said. Quietly, decisively. Your Grace cannot afford sentiment, Your Grace. Rosamund had learned that when Lady Maud wished to bend Lucian, she wrapped his title around him like a chain. There had been a time, early in the marriage, when Rosamund had tried to speak to him of smaller chains. Separate breakfasts, polite dinners, bedrooms divided by a corridor, long enough to feel like a county road. Invitations accepted in his name, and duties performed in hers. He had listened with courtesy and answered with distance. You have every comfort due your rank, he had said then. If there is something lacking in the household, speak to Mrs. Bell. Something lacking. She had almost told him it was not a household matter when a wife could predict the sound of her husband's boots, but not the nature of his thoughts. Instead, she had thanked him and learned how to become useful. Useful women were rarely embraced, but they were often allowed to remain. What would you have me do? Lucian asked. Lady Maud paused just long enough to make reluctance sound virtuous. Send her to Hampshire. Say her health requires quiet. Keep her away from the London papers until the matter is contained. If she protests, that will only prove the instability I have long feared. The folio slipped half an inch in Rosamund's grasp. Instability. So that was the shape of the trap. Not wicked enough to hang. Not innocent enough to be hurt. Merely delicate. Unreliable. A nervous wife whose words could be folded away like a shawl after winter. Her thumb found the cracked ivory piano key in her pocket. It was smooth on one side and broken at the end where age had split it. Her mother had once laughed over that key and said broken things still made music if one learned where to place the pressure. Rosamund had not understood then. She understood now with such sudden clarity that the corridor seemed to steady around her. And if she denies it? Lucian asked. She will. Lady Maud's voice lowered. That is what frightened women do. A long silence followed. Rosamund waited. Some part of her, wounded but not dead, waited for Lucian to say, My wife deserves to be heard. She waited for one sentence. One doubt. One memory of the woman who had stood beside him through funerals, tenants' petitions, winter fever in the servants' hall, and endless dinners where Lady Maud corrected the angle of her fan as if Rosamund had been born to disappoint. Inside the study, Lucian exhaled. When he spoke again, his voice was cold enough to end a life without raising a hand. I curse the day Rosamund Vale entered this house. The words did not strike her loudly. They entered quietly, almost politely, and found the place where hope had been kept hidden. Rosamund's hand fell from the door. She did not gasp. She did not drop the folio. She did not fling the door open and demand justice from a man who had already rendered judgment without seeing her face. She stood in the corridor and felt with terrible calm the final thread inside her give way. Lady Maud murmured something Rosamund did not hear. Lucian answered, but his voice had become only sound. The house seemed to recede from her. The portraits along the corridor, all those dead Vale men, with their proud mouths and painted hounds, watched her as if she had finally understood the lesson they had been teaching since her wedding day. This house did not love. It preserved, it displayed, it endured, and it expected women to do the same. Rosamund turned away from the door. Her slippers made no sound on the carpet. At the bend of the corridor, she stopped once and looked back at the study. The lamp still burned beneath it. The closed door looked ordinary, polished, handsome, perfectly made. How strange that a life could end on one side of such a beautiful piece of wood, while the man on the other side continued breathing, speaking, deciding. In her bedchamber, the fire had fallen low. Her maid had laid out a pale mourning gown for the next day, as if the next day still intended to find her there. Rosamund set the folio on the escritoire and removed only 3 pages from within it. Not all. Enough. She folded them into a packet, sealed it with plain wax, and wrote no name on the outside. Then she crossed to the small rosewood box that held the few possessions Lady Maud had never considered worth inspecting. Her mother's cracked ivory key lay warm from her pocket when she placed it beside a small purse, 2 letters from a widow in Bath, and a narrow ribbon faded nearly white. She changed without ringing for assistance. A duchess could not vanish with trunks. A woman could. From the dressing table, she lifted her wedding ring. For a moment, the gold circled the tip of her finger. Bright in the firelight, Lucian had placed it there in a chapel filled with witnesses, his face solemn, his hand steady, his eyes giving away nothing. She had been 23 and trained to call steadiness a form of respect. Now she understood that respect without tenderness could become another kind of cold. She laid the ring on the table, beside the silver hairbrush he had given her on their first Christmas, still engraved with her initials, as if engraving were intimacy. In the corridor below, the tall clock struck 4. Dawn had not yet come, but the black at the windows had thinned toward grey. Rosamund put on a dark cloak and took the small packet, the purse, and the cracked piano key. At her chamber door she paused, not because she doubted, because she wanted, with one last foolish ache, to be found before leaving. A footstep, a knock, her name spoken not as accusation but as plea. Nothing came. The house remained obediently asleep. She descended the servants' stair because it was narrower, dimmer, and honest about Etus. In the front hall, she placed the Duchess's household keys on a silver tray beneath Lady Maud's lilies. They landed softly, but to Rosamund, the sound was enormous. She looked once toward the study door at the far end of the hall. Then she opened the side entrance and stepped into the wet pre-dawn air of London. By sunrise, the Duke of Alder-mere would have a silent house, an abandoned ring, and no wife to condemn. Rosamund pulled her hood forward and walked into the mist without leaving a word. By 7 o'clock, Alder-mere House had learned how loudly silence could announce disaster. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, discovered it first. Though later, every servant would remember having felt something wrong before the truth entered words. The Duchess's bell had not rung. Her maid, Clara, had gone up with warm water and found the bed untouched. The fire sunk to ash, and the pale morning gown still waiting across the chair, like a promise no one had kept. On the dressing table lay the wedding ring. Beside it rested the silver hairbrush, the pearl pins, and a folded square of linen so neatly placed that Clara stared at it for several seconds, before she understood that neatness was not comfort. It was farewell without the mercy of explanation. The cry she made was small, quickly swallowed, because a servant in a ducal house learned early that panic belonged to people with no training. Still, the basin trembled in her hands. By the time Mrs. Bell came in, Clara had turned white. "Where is her grace?" the housekeeper asked, though the room had already answered. Clara shook her head. "I don't know, ma'am. Her cloak is gone. Not the blue one with the velvet, only the plain, dark one, and her small purse from the drawer." Mrs. Bell crossed the room with a composure built through 30 years of births, deaths, scandals, and dinners saved from ruin by discipline alone. She checked the wardrobe. Nearly every gown remained. The trunks were locked. The jewels were in their cases. No traveling dress had been laid out. No note sat upon the pillow, no bottle of salts, no torn letter, no sign of a woman who had fled in wild distress. That frightened Mrs. Bell more than disorder would have done. The Duchess had left carefully. She had left like a woman who had decided before the house was awake that she would not give anyone the honor of stopping her. Then Mrs. Bell saw the silver tray in the hall below. The household keys lay upon it beneath the lilies Lady Maud favored. Not dropped, placed. The housekeeper looked from the keys to the front corridor, then toward the side passage that led to the servants' stair. "No one speaks of this," she said. "Not to the footman, not to the kitchen maids, not to the coachman unless I tell him. Do you understand me?" Clara nodded, but her eyes filled. "His Grace will ask." Mrs. Bell closed her hand around the keys. "Then His Grace shall be told before London is." Lucian had not slept. He had remained in the study until dawn, first with Lady Maud, then alone, staring at the forged letter, as though force of will might turn ink into truth. At 6, he had sent a note to his solicitor's office. At 6:30, he had read the letter again, and disliked himself for feeling less certain than he had sounded. By 7, when Mrs. Bell knocked, his temper had sharpened under fatigue. But something beneath it had begun to move. He had thought more than once of the corridor, of a sound he might have heard after Lady Maud left, of the way the house had seemed to hold its breath. "Come," he said. Mrs. Bell entered with the keys in both hands. She did not curtsy as low as usual. That was the first thing he noticed. The second was her face. Housekeepers in old houses did not look frightened unless there was cause. "Your Grace," she said. "Her Grace is not in her room." Lucian stood. The chair scraped hard against the carpet. "What do you mean?" "The bed has not been slept in. Her travelling trunks remain. Most of her clothing remains. Her wedding ring is on the dressing table." The words struck separately. Bed, trunks, ring. Lucian looked past Mrs. Bell to the door, as if Rosamund might appear there, calm and pale, carrying the explanation he had refused to hear. "Where is she?" "We don't know, Your Grace. Who let her out?" Mrs. Bell held herself very straight. "No one that I have yet found. The side entrance was unbolted from within. Send for the porter, wake the coachman. Ask at every stand within half a mile. No, within a mile. Find whether a hired carriage was called." He reached for the bell pull, then stopped because Mrs. Bell had not moved. "What else?" She opened her hand. The household keys lay in her palm. Lucian stared at them. For 3 years, those keys had hung from Rosamund's waist during household mornings. He had seen them 100 times and never considered what they meant. Stores, linen, still room, wine cellar. Servants' wages prepared and checked. Sickroom supplies replenished before he knew there had been illness below stairs. All the invisible machinery of comfort, entrusted to a woman he had called useful and then condemned as disloyal. "Where did you find them?" he asked. "On the silver tray in the front hall, Your Grace." "Did she leave a note?" "No." No, a word with no handle. Lucian moved around the desk and past Mrs. Bell without another question. He took the stairs 2 at a time, then slowed before Rosamund's chamber because haste suddenly felt indecent. Her door stood open. Clara waited beside the wardrobe, eyes lowered, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed. Lucian dismissed her with a quiet motion. He entered alone. The room was too orderly. That was the cruelty of it. Rosamund had not torn herself from the house. She had removed herself from it, with the same precision she had given everything he never thanked her for. On the table, the wedding ring waited in a circle of morning light. He did not touch it at first. The gold looked smaller than it should have, impossibly small for the weight it had carried. Beside it lay the silver brush he had chosen through a jeweler after their first Christmas, because he had not known what else to give a wife he barely spoke to. He remembered handing it to her in the breakfast room. She had smiled and said it was lovely. Not warm, not wounded. Lovely. He had accepted the answer because it required nothing from him. Now he saw that her politeness had been a veil, and he had been grateful for the veil because it spared him the obligation to look beneath it. He lifted the ring. It was cold. In the small rosewood box beside the bed, an empty groove showed where something narrow had once rested. Lucian frowned. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, appeared at the door at once. "What was kept here?" Mrs. Bell looked. "I believe Her Grace kept a broken piano key there, Your Grace. From her mother's instrument. She sometimes carried it when she was troubled." "A piano key?" "Yes, Your Grace. Ivory. Cracked at the end," he remembered then. A small pale object in Rosamund's hand during the late winter fever among the servants, when she had sat up 2 nights arranging broth, linen, and quiet orders while he entertained county men in Hampshire. He had thought it an odd habit. He had not asked. The shame that moved through him then was quiet, but it had teeth. Who knew she might go to Bath? He asked. Mrs. Bell hesitated. "Clara says Her Grace sent a small sealed parcel 3 days ago. The direction was to a Mrs. Annesley in Bath, a widow of respectable standing. Her Grace asked that it go by private messenger." Lucian turned. "Why was I not told?" The housekeeper's expression did not change. "Her Grace did not instruct me to tell you, Your Grace." It was not defiance. It was worse. It was fact. Rosamund had been mistress of his house. She had been allowed authority in linens, menus, servants, and flowers, but not belief. Not trust. Not the simple presumption that when she sent a parcel, she might be protecting something important. He closed his fingers around the ring. No one outside this house is to know she is gone. Very good, Your Grace. If anyone calls, Her Grace is indisposed. He stopped. The words tasted like Lady Maud's plan, like the lie already waiting to swallow Rosamund. His jaw tightened. No, say Her Grace is not receiving callers today. Nothing more. No illness, no nerves. No explanations. Mrs. Bell's eyes lifted for a fraction of a second. Yes, Your Grace. Send Thomas to the nearest carriage stands. Send James to the Bath coach office. Quietly. If a woman matching Her Grace's description travelled before dawn, I want the name used, the direction, and whether she was alone. Yes, Your Grace, and Mrs. Bell. She paused. If any servant repeats one word of this below stairs or beyond the house, they answer to me, not Lady Maud, me. Something like approval passed over the housekeeper's face and vanished. I shall make that clear. When she had gone, Lucian stood alone in the room, where his wife had made the final decision of their marriage without waking him. The abandoned ring pressed into his palm. On the escritoire lay the leather folio. He had not noticed it when he entered, because he had looked first for signs of ruin, and only then for signs of truth. That, he thought, was the habit that had lost her. He crossed the room and opened it. The first pages were estate accounts, columns corrected in Rosamund's careful hand, nothing frantic, nothing confused. Each irregularity was marked with dates, initials, and references. He turned one page, then another. Rent from Alder-mere South Farms had been entered twice, once properly and once under false repair charge. 3 tenant payments had been redirected through a clerk named Gideon Pike. His own steward's signature had been copied with small errors in the downward stroke. Then he saw the note in Rosamund's hand at the bottom of the page. The signature is mine in shape only. It is not mine in conscience. Lucian sat down because standing had become difficult. She had come to him with this. She had stood outside his door with proof in her hands while he listened to Lady Maud's poison and called judgment by the name of duty. He turned to the final sheet and found a sealed scrap tucked beneath it. For one irrational moment, he hoped it would be a letter to him. It was not. It was a list of questions she had meant to ask. Who benefits if I am blamed? Who had access to my notes? Why was Mr. Pike present in London when the Hampshire accounts were copied? Why does Lady Maud want the matter settled before morning? Lucian read the last question twice. Then the study door from the night before rose in his mind, polished, closed, and unforgivable. He stood so quickly the chair shifted back. Havers, he called, using the voice that made footmen appear as if summoned by law. The young footman arrived breathless. Your Grace, my horse will be ready within 10 minutes. Send a messenger to my solicitor, another to Bath. Not by common post, private rider, and find Lady Maud. Havers bowed and fled. Lucian looked once more at the ring in his palm. For 3 years Rosamund had worn the sign of his name. Before dawn she had decided his name no longer sheltered her. The thought was unbearable because it was deserved. He placed the ring inside his waistcoat pocket, close enough to feel its edge when he breathed. Then he took the folio under his arm and walked from her chamber into a house that had suddenly become too large, too bright, and emptier than grief. Lucian reached his study with Rosamund's folio under his arm and the abandoned ring in his waistcoat pocket. And for the first time in 3 years the room looked less like a place of command than a witness box built against him. The lamp from the night before had burned almost dry. The forged letter still lay on the desk where Lady Maud had placed it, neat, damning, and poisonous in its confidence. Lucian set Rosamund's pages beside it. For several seconds he did nothing but look at the 2 versions of his wife. One was the woman Lady Maud had described, clever enough to deceive, fragile enough to deny it, and convenient enough to remove. The other was on the pages Rosamund had left behind. That woman had followed dates with patient precision. She had matched tenant payments to steward receipts. She had circled false repair charges, copied ink blots, and noted small mistakes in signatures that no careless mind would ever have noticed. Lucian had spent his life distrusting sentiment because sentiment had once nearly ruined his father. He had called that discipline. He had called it wisdom. Now, discipline required him to admit that he had trusted a convenient accusation, because it spared him the more difficult work of knowing his own wife. He sat, drew the forged letter closer, and compared it to the note at the bottom of Rosamund's ledger. The imitation was clever at first glance. The shape of the capital R was close. The slope of the hand resembled hers, yet the pressure was wrong. Rosamund wrote as she moved through rooms, controlled, light, and exact. The forged letter pressed too hard at the end of words, as if the writer believed force could substitute for grace. Lucian found the first false charge before 7:30. By 8, he had found 6. By the time the clocks across Mayfair began striking 9, his solicitor, Mr. Edmund Harcourt, stood opposite the desk with a face that had gone steadily more severe. "You are certain this was found among the Hampshire accounts?" Lucian asked. "I'm certain it came through the copied estate packet sent to my office last month," Harcourt said. "But I don't like the chain of handling, Your Grace. Too many hands touched it before it reached me." Lucian tapped one marked page. "Name them." Harcourt hesitated. The steward at Alder-mere Hall copied the original rents. His underclerk prepared a summary. The packet then passed through the London office. Mr. Gideon Pike had access before I reviewed it. Pike. The name was small and unpleasant in Lucian's mouth. "What do you know of him?" "He's ambitious, underpaid, and too fond of appearing useful to people above him. I wouldn't have trusted him with private correspondence, but I didn't think him dangerous." Useful men are dangerous when they resent being small. Lucian lifted the forged letter. Could he have seen Her Grace's handwriting? Easily. Invitations. Household instructions, charity lists, receipts countersigned in her hand. A duchess leaves more ink behind than she knows. The words entered Lucian with a sharpness he did not show. Rosamund had left ink everywhere in his life. Menace corrected before dinners. Notes to the steward. Reminders about tenants. Quiet instructions for a servant's mother to receive broth and coal in winter. He had seen her handwriting daily and mistaken its constancy for decoration. "Find Pike," Lucian said, quietly. "I don't want Bow Street gossip. I don't want a clerk boasting of ducal panic. And I don't want Lady Maud informed before I know where he is." Harcourt looked toward the study door, then back. "Then I must speak plainly. If Her Grace is absent and Lady Maud has already shaped a story, delay favors whoever set this in motion. Her Grace's absence is not to be discussed." Lucian's voice cut the room cleanly. "Not as illness, not as nerves, not as disgrace. She is not receiving callers. That is all anyone outside this house will know." Harcourt bowed his head. "As you wish." "No," Lucian said, "as justice requires. It was not enough." He knew it as soon as he said it. Justice would have been opening the door the night before. Justice would have been asking Rosamund to sit down and speak before deciding what sort of woman she was. This was not justice yet. It was only the beginning of repair. A knock came, and Havers entered with a folded note on a silver salver. "From the London office, Your Grace." The clerk who carried it said it was urgent. Lucian broke the seal. The note was short. Mr. Gideon Pike had not appeared at the office that morning. His desk had been cleared of personal items. A bottle of dark blue-black ink, ordered for his use the week before, was missing. Lucian handed the note to Harcourt. "There is your dangerous, useful man." Harcourt read it once, then again. "I'll send a man to his lodgings. Send 2, but discreetly." Lucian reached for another sheet from Rosamund's folio. "And speak to the stationers near Chancery Lane. I want the ink traced." "Your Grace?" "That may take time." "Then begin before more time is wasted." Harcourt gathered the papers with care, but Lucian stopped him before he could take the ledger. "No. The originals remain with me." "Of course." The solicitor paused at the door. "May I ask whether Her Grace knew Pike by name?" Lucian looked at Rosamund's notes. Her questions were calm, but beneath them he could now see urgency. She had known enough to fear the answer. "She knew more than I did," he said. Harcourt's expression altered, not with pity, but with understanding. "Then perhaps, Your Grace. The quickest road to the truth is the road she tried to show you." When the door closed behind him, Lucian remained standing. The study had filled with morning, but he could still see the corridor, as it must have been at midnight, narrow, lamplit and silent. Rosamund outside, his own voice inside, Lady Maud's satisfaction moving between them like smoke. He took the forged letter and placed it beside Rosamund's note. His anger had not vanished. It had changed direction. Anger at Rosamund had been simple. Anger at himself was heavier, because it had nowhere honourable to go. Lady Maud arrived before luncheon, dressed in dove-grey silk, with black jet at her throat, as though she had come prepared to mourn propriety itself. She did not wait to be fully announced. She entered with the confidence of a woman who had arranged rooms all her life and expected people to become furniture inside them. "Lucian, this secrecy is unwise," she said. "The servants are already whispering. If Rosamund has done something rash, we must control the tone before others control it for us." Lucian did not invite her to sit. "Her Grace has done nothing I am prepared to let you name." Lady Maud stopped. Only for a breath, but he saw it. "My dear boy, don't let distress make you sentimental. Don't call me that." Her eyebrows lifted. "I beg your pardon," I said. "Don't call me that. I am not a boy. And I am no longer interested in being guided by half-truths disguised as concern." The color in her face shifted, but her voice remained smooth. "You are tired, naturally. A missing wife is distressing, even when the wife has behaved without judgment." Lucian picked up the forged letter. "Who gave you this?" "It came to me through a reliable channel." "Name it." "Lucian, you know I can't expose every person who tries to protect this family. You can, or you can leave this room." Silence fell with satisfying abruptness. It was not loud. Nothing in old houses was loud unless something had already broken. Lady Maud looked at the papers on the desk and seemed, for the first time, to notice that the pieces were no longer arranged as she had left them. "What have you found?" she asked. "Enough to know that Rosamund came here last night to warn me, or to distract you." "No." The word surprised even him. It came from somewhere below pride. "No, Aunt. I should have said that before." Lady Maud's mouth tightened. "You would take her side against your blood." Lucian thought of Rosamund's keys on the silver tray, her ring left behind, her handwriting asking who benefited if she was blamed. "I am taking the side of the truth. Truth is rarely so clean. Then it is fortunate my wife marked the dirt for me." Lady Maud's eyes hardened, and in that instant the soft aunt vanished. What remained was older, sharper, and far less affectionate. "Be careful, Your Grace. A duchess who vanishes before dawn gives society a story whether you approve it or not. Then society will receive only the story I permit." He stepped closer to the desk, not to threaten but to end the conversation. "Until further notice, you will not speak of Her Grace to callers, hostesses, correspondents, or servants. You will not call her ill. You will not call her unstable. You will not imply she has left my protection." Lady Maud stared at him. "And has she?" The question landed because the answer was obvious. Rosamund had left his roof because his protection had failed before it began. Lucian's jaw tightened. "Leave me." For a moment, he thought she might refuse. Then she bent in the shallowest courtesy, allowed, and withdrew. The door had barely closed when another knock came, more urgent than the last. Havers entered with travel dust on his sleeve and a sealed note in hand. "The Bath rider has returned early, Your Grace. He met one of Mrs. Annesley's servants at the posting inn." There was a reply. Lucian took the note. The seal was plain. The hand was that of an older woman, brisk and legible. He opened it with more care than he had opened any letter in years. The message contained only 4 lines. "The parcel sent by Her Grace arrived safely 3 days past. Her Grace herself has not arrived at my house. I have not seen her. If she is missing, I pray you are searching for the woman, not merely the Duchess." Lucian read the last line until the words blurred at the edges. Bath had the parcel. Bath did not have Rosamund. The road he thought she had taken had already split beneath his feet. Somewhere between London and the life she had prepared, his wife had vanished beyond the reach of rank, command, and apology. For the first time since dawn, Lucian said her name aloud. Not Duchess, not wife, not Her Grace. Rosamund. It sounded like a plea, and there was no one in the room merciful enough not to hear it. By the time Lucian Vale spoke her name in an empty study, Rosamund had already become Mrs. Rosemary to a lodging keeper who counted coins twice before trusting them. Bath received her not as a duchess, not as Lady Rosamund Harbury, and certainly not as the missing wife of one of England's most powerful peers. It received her as a pale woman in a plain dark cloak, who arrived by a hired chaise after changing conveyances twice, carrying one small bag, a sealed packet no longer in her possession, and a cracked ivory piano key wrapped in linen. She had not gone to Mrs. Annesley's house. That had been the point. The parcel had gone there because a packet could travel openly where a woman could not. Mrs. Annesley, widowed, respectable, and shrewder than most gentlemen who called themselves practical, had arranged a narrow lodging above a bookbinder's shop, near a quiet street where invalid ladies took the air and reduced gentlewomen pretended not to notice one another's economies. Rosamund reached it past noon with damp hems, empty hands from cold, and a face so composed that the landlady asked no questions beyond the name. Mrs. Merrin, Rosamund said, and for one moment the borrowed name trembled on her tongue. Then it settled. A name was a garment. If chosen carefully, it could hide wounds without making them less real. Her room held a narrow bed, a washstand, 2 chairs, and a square pianoforte with yellowed keys, one of them missing. Rosamund stared at the gap before she removed her gloves. Mrs. Annesley had always possessed a sense of irony, so dry it nearly became kindness. On the small table lay a note in the widow's brisk hand. The room is paid for through Saturday. After that, you will pay for it yourself if you intend to prove yourself alive. The instrument is out of tune, but so are most respectable households. Rest 2 hours, then decide what sort of woman you mean to be. Rosamund read the note twice. She did not weep. She had done her weeping somewhere between London and the first posting in, not loudly, not dramatically. Only with tears that slipped beneath her veil, while a farm cart rattled past, and a boy led 2 horses through mud as if the world had not ended. Now there was no room for collapse. Collapse required witnesses or cushions. She had neither. She placed the cracked ivory key into the missing space on the pianoforte, not because it fit perfectly, but because it made the instrument look less wounded. Beneath the lip of the keyboard, her fingers found the small brass catch Mrs. Annesley had described in her old letter. The cracked key pressed it loose. A shallow compartment opened with a tired click. Inside lay the copied ledger pages she had sent ahead, a small roll of coins and a clean square of paper. Rosamund touched the pages as if touching proof of her own sanity. Lucian had heard accusation. Lady Maud had offered a story. London would believe whichever version arrived first with better manners. But ink did not sneer. Numbers did not pity. Signatures, even false ones, had habits. She would not be erased as a nervous wife, merely because it was convenient. She closed the compartment and sat at the instrument. The first note shivered out, thin and sour. She almost laughed. It was an ugly little sound, but it belonged to her. 2 days later, Bath had not swallowed Rosamund, though it had tried to inspect her. She had been introduced as Mrs. Rosemary, a distant connection of Mrs. Annesley's, recently widowed enough to explain black gloves and reserved manners, but not so freshly bereaved that society would require details. The arrangement was imperfect. That made it believable. Bath liked sorrow best when it came trimmed, modest, and useful. By Thursday afternoon, Rosamund sat in Mrs. Lydgate's front parlour, teaching 3 reduced gentlewomen how to keep time through a simple Mozart passage, while their chaperones drank weak tea and measured her accent. The youngest pupil, Miss Tamsin Bower, had a nervous wrist and a gown carefully turned at the seams. Rosamund noticed both and corrected only the wrist. "Do not strike the note as though it has offended you," she said gently. "Let your hand arrive before your fear does." Miss Bower tried again. The phrase steadied. A little surprise lit her face. "There," Rosamund said. "You heard it, did you not?" The girl nodded. "I didn't think I could. Most people are taught what they cannot do by someone who stopped listening too soon." The words left Rosamund before she could soften them. Across the room, Mrs. Annesley looked up from her tea with one eyebrow raised, but said nothing. The lesson should have ended quietly. It would have, had Lady Felicity Ord not arrived with her niece, and the kind of benevolence that entered rooms like an unpaid bill. Lady Felicity was a Bath authority of the smaller sort, important enough to wound, not important enough to be generous without an audience. She listened for 3 minutes, praised no one, and finally turned her narrow smile upon Rosamund. "Mrs. Merrin, is it? Mrs. Annesley tells me you have fallen into reduced circumstances." "Mrs. Annesley has told you I accept pupils," Rosamund replied. "There is a difference." A spoon paused halfway to a saucer. Lady Felicity smiled a little more. How admirable. Still, one must not be proud when Providence has lowered one's station. "I have a nephew's charity committee seeking respectable women for needlework distribution. It is not musical, of course, but it is honest. I could recommend you." "You are kind to consider it," Rosamund said. "I am already employed. Teaching scales to girls who will never play beyond their own parlours. Teaching girls that discipline may still belong to them when fortune does not." Miss Bower looked down, but not before Rosamund saw the quick gratitude in her eyes. Lady Felicity's face cooled. She opened a reticule and drew out a folded note. "Then perhaps this will spare you immediate embarrassment." She placed it on the table beside Rosamund. It was money, not payment, not fee. Alms disguised as rescue, offered publicly so refusal would look ungrateful, and acceptance would confirm dissent. The parlour held its breath. Rosamund looked at the note. She thought of the wedding ring left on her dressing table. She thought of household keys on a silver tray. She thought of Lucian's voice behind the door, deciding what she was before asking who she had been. Then she picked up the folded money and returned it to Lady Felicity with both hands, as if presenting a calling card. "I accept wages, my lady. I do not accept humiliation in banknote form," Miss Bower gasped. Mrs. Annesley's teacup touched its saucer with a precise click. Lady Felicity's cheeks reddened. "You forget yourself." "No," Rosamund said softly. "That is precisely what I am trying not to do." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was clean. Lady Felicity departed within 5 minutes, taking her niece, her charity, and her wounded dignity with her. The remaining pupils did not speak at first. Then Miss Bower sat at the pianoforte and played the Mozart passage again, correctly this time, with her shoulders back. Rosamund turned away before anyone could see how much that small victory cost her. Later, when the lamps were being lit and the pupils had gone, Mrs. Annesley found Rosamund in the narrow room above the bookbinder's shop, kneeling before the pianoforte with the hidden compartment open. The widow was 60, sharp-eyed, and dressed in lavender silk that had been altered so well, no careless person would know it was old. "Lady Felicity will dine on outrage for a week," she said. "That should improve her appetite." Rosamund slid the ledger copies back into the compartment. I should not have answered her so plainly. Nonsense. Plainness is often mistaken for bad manners by people who profit from confusion. Mrs. Annesley closed the door behind her. A note came from London. "The Duke has sent inquiries." Rosamund's hand stilled. The room seemed to tighten around the word Duke. "To you?" "Yes," I answered truthfully at the time. "You had not reached my house. You still have not reached my house, technically speaking. That distinction may not protect you. My dear, I have been a widow for 18 years. Technical distinctions are the only reason I still possess my silver." Rosamund almost smiled. Almost. "Is he searching for me?" "Yes." The widow watched her carefully. But whether he searches for his wife, his pride, or his conscience remains to be seen. Rosamund looked at the cracked key resting in place among the pianoforte's yellowed teeth. He believed her. "Lady Maud," Rosamund nodded. The movement felt heavier than speech. "He did not ask me." Mrs. Annesley's expression softened, though her voice did not. "Then he must learn what questions cost when asked too late." Rosamund closed the compartment. "I cannot hide forever. No, nor should you. But you may choose when to be found." Below, a carriage rolled over the wet stones. Rosamund went to the window by habit, careful to stand behind the curtain. A lady descended before the lodging opposite. Bright in a fashionable travelling cloak, her bonnet tilted just enough to show golden brown curls and the profile London hostesses loved to praise. Miss Octavia Fenwick looked up toward the windows, as if Bath itself had whispered a secret. Rosamund stepped back at once, but not before Octavia's eyes sharpened. Recognition did not always cry out. Sometimes it smiled. By evening, a private note had left Bath for London, written in Octavia's elegant hand, and sealed with pale green wax. Lady Maud would receive it before breakfast. It contained only one sentence. I believe the Duchess is hiding in Bath. Lucian arrived in Bath, under a sky the colour of tarnished pewter, carrying more authority than luggage and less certainty than either. He had ridden part of the way, changed horses twice, and finished the last miles in a hired carriage, because a duke on horseback drew eyes, and eyes became gossip before noon. By the time he reached Mrs. Annesley's street, the lamps were being lit behind Rain Street windows, and every respectable house seemed to have drawn its curtains against him. His man had found the lodging above the bookbinder's shop, but not by demanding names. Lucian had learned in the bitter space between London and Bath that command was a blunt instrument. Rosamund had not left him because he lacked power. She had left because he had used power where trust was required. So he stood in the shadow of an arched doorway across the street and watched a narrow house where music drifted down through imperfect glass. The sound was thin at first, a few notes from a worn pianoforte. Then the melody steadied. It was not fashionable. It was not designed for applause. It moved slowly, with pauses that felt like words swallowed before they could disgrace the speaker. Lucian knew almost nothing of music beyond what a gentleman was expected to tolerate at dinners and admire at musicales. Yet he knew loneliness when it had been made disciplined enough to sound beautiful. Rosamund was playing. Not Lady Rosamund Harbury as she had been raised. Not the Duchess of Alder-mere as his household had used her. Rosamund herself, hidden above a bookbinder's shop under a false widow's name, speaking through keys because her husband had not listened when she still stood beneath his roof. He crossed the street only after the final note faded. A maid with red hands admitted him as far as the hall, then vanished upward. Mrs. Annesley came down instead, dressed in altered lavender silk, and holding a candle as if she were prepared to burn any man who mistook age for weakness. Your Grace, she said. She did not curtsy. Mrs. Annesley. He bowed because anything less would have insulted the only person in Bath who had apparently known how to protect his wife. I believe Her Grace is here. You believe many things, I expect. Some of them may even be useful by now. The rebuke was so precise that he accepted it without defense. I need to see her. Need is a dangerous word from a husband. Then I ask. Mrs. Annesley studied him for a long moment. Rain tapped against the fanlight above the door. Somewhere upstairs, a chair moved. You will not see her alone? No, the answer came at once. Not unless she requests it. You will not raise your voice. No, you will not command her to return. His hand closed around the brim of his hat. No, the widow's expression shifted slightly. Not softened, but less armed. Very well, you may wait in the back parlour. The room was small and plainly furnished, with 2 worn chairs, a tea table, and shelves crowded with books whose spines had been repaired by careful hands. Lucian stood rather than sit. He had waited in grand rooms all his life, while others hurried to him. This waiting was different. It did not flatter him, it judged him. When the door opened, he turned too quickly. Rosamund entered in a dark grey gown that did not belong to a duchess, without jewels, without the wedding ring he carried in his pocket, and without the quiet softness he had once mistaken for weakness. She looked thinner. No, not thinner, clearer, as if absence had stripped away every courtesy she had worn for his comfort. Mrs. Annesley came in behind her and took the chair near the window. Rosamund remained standing. Your Grace, she said. The title landed between them like a closed gate. Lucian bowed. Rosamund. Her eyes moved once to his face, then away. That name sounded less welcome the last time I heard you speak it. He had rehearsed explanations during the journey. None survived the calm fact of her voice. You heard me, I heard enough. Then I owe you more than apology. Yes, she said. You do. Mrs. Annesley poured tea with the serenity of a woman attending a social visit, rather than a marriage at the edge of ruin. Lucian looked at Rosamund's hands. They were clasped loosely before her, not trembling. He wished they trembled. It would have let him imagine she still needed steadiness from him. I found your ledger, he said. I read your notes. Mr. Pike has disappeared from the solicitor's office. The ink on the forged letter may be traced to him. You were right. Rosamund's face did not change, but the stillness around her sharpened. I know you suspected him before that night? Yes. And Lady Maud? Yes. The single word did more damage than accusation. Lucian took a slow breath. Why did you not tell me sooner? Rosamund looked at him then, and he felt the question collapse under its own cruelty. Because you had not made truth a place where I could safely stand. Mrs. Annesley's teacup touched its saucer. Nothing else moved. Lucian accepted the blow because it was just. I did not listen. No, I let my aunt name your character for me. Yes. He wanted to step closer. He did not. I came to ask for the rest of the evidence. Something flickered in Rosamund's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or confirmation, of course. The words were quiet. The evidence. No, he said quickly, and hated that he had needed correction so soon. I came for you first. But I have no right to ask you to trust that unless my conduct proves it. The evidence matters because it may protect your name. My name was not what you cursed. His hand tightened at his side. I know what I said. Do you? For the first time, pain came through the polish of her composure, not as tears, but as a slight roughness in the question. Do you know what it is to stand outside a door with proof in your hands and hear the man who promised before God to protect you speak as if your presence had been the family's misfortune? Lucian's throat tightened. No. Then do not come to me with the voice of a duke and call it urgency. Silence filled the parlor. Rain moved over the windows in thin silver lines. From the street came the sound of wheels on wet stone. Lucian bowed his head, not theatrically, not for pity, but because there was no honorable posture left above that one. You're right. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had expected argument and found its absence more unsettling. He looked up. I cannot undo the door. I cannot unsay what you heard. I can only tell you that I have forbidden any story naming you ill, unstable, or disgraced. My household is silent. My solicitor searches for Pike. Lady Maud is not to speak of you. And does Lady Maud obey you when obedience does not suit her? Not willingly. Then your silence will not hold London for long, I know. Rosamund crossed to the window and looked down at the street without parting the curtain. It has already begun here. Lucian followed her gaze. Across the way, under the awning of a confectioner's shop, Miss Octavia Fenwick stood with another young lady, her gloved hand raised delicately to her mouth. She was not looking at the rain. She was watching the bookbinder's door. When Lucian appeared at the window behind Rosamund, Octavia's expression brightened with triumph so brief and polished that another man might have missed it. He did not. She knows, Rosamund said. She saw me yesterday. By supper, half the room looked at me as though reduced circumstances were contagious. Lucian stepped back from the window. I will speak to her. No, Rosamund turned. You will not make a scene in Bath because your pride has discovered witnesses. This is not pride. Then prove it by doing nothing that makes my lodging impossible. The command would have angered him once. Now it steadied him. What do you require? She seemed startled by the question. Mrs. Annesley, near the tea table, looked faintly approving. Rosamund took a moment before answering. Protection without ownership, silence without lies, and time. You shall have them. Do not promise quickly, Your Grace. You have broken slower things than promises. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Lucian reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. Not the ring. He would not use the ring as plea, not here. Not while she stood unprotected by trust. This is the list of irregularities I found confirmed by Harcourt. I need to know whether your hidden page concerns Pike, Lady Maud, or someone else. Rosamund did not take the paper at first. The final page names people who cannot survive careless exposure. Tenants? Her gaze sharpened. You have learned to guess gently. 2 yes. She accepted the paper, but not his hand. I will give you copies of what I have. Not all, not yet. Because you do not trust me. Because trust is not restored by arrival. Mrs. Annesley rose then. A wise sentence. It deserves more tea. Rosamund almost smiled, and the sight struck Lucian with unexpected force. He had seen her smile 100 polite smiles. This one was smaller, rarer, and not offered to him. For the first time, he wanted not to possess it, but to become the sort of man before whom it might appear freely. A knock sounded below. The maid entered with a card on a tray. Mrs. Annesley took it, read it, and her mouth thinned. Lady Wrexham invites Mrs. Merrin to a small dinner tomorrow evening. How swift Bath becomes hospitable when it smells blood. Rosamund took the card. Her face went pale, but her hand remained steady. Octavia's doing. Lucian's first instinct was refusal, command, prevention. He held it back. You need not go. Rosamund looked from the card to him. If I refuse, they will say I am hiding. If I attend, they may name me. Then let me attend as well, to rescue me, to stand where I should have stood before. The room quieted around that answer. Rosamund did not forgive him. She did not soften. But she did not dismiss him either. After a long moment, she placed the invitation on the table between them. Your Grace may speak, she said. I am no longer obliged to listen. Lucian bowed once, low enough to accept the terms. Outside, Miss Octavia Fenwick watched the house with a satisfied smile, already imagining a duchess brought low before witnesses. Inside, Rosamund opened the hidden compartment of her life by the smallest inch and handed Lucian 3 copied pages, keeping the final one beneath her palm. Rosamund did not sleep after Lucian left the 3 copied pages upon Mrs. Annesley's parlour table and carried away the silence between them like something fragile he had finally learned not to drop. Long after the house settled, she sat before the square pianoforte with one candle burning low and the final ledger page beneath her palm. The hidden compartment stood open. The cracked ivory key lay beside it, pale as a small bone against the dark wood. Below the window, Bath had gone quiet except for the late wheels of a carriage and the occasional footstep passing over wet stone. It would have been easy, dangerously easy, to mistake Lucian's restraint for change. He had not commanded. He had not touched her. He had not spoken her name as if it belonged to him. He had looked at her with shame unguarded enough to make memory ache. Yet shame was not trust. A man could regret a wound because it stained his honor and still fail to understand the person who bled from it. Rosamund drew the final page toward her. It contained the name that had made her hesitate in London, even before Lady Maud's trap closed around her. Bower, not a grand name, not one that would matter in a Mayfair drawing-room. Thomas Bower, tenant of Alder-mere's South Farm, deceased 3 winters past. Mary Bower, widow, arrears forgiven by the Duchess privately after a fever took 2 cows and left the family near ruin. Tamsin Bower, daughter, now in Bath under the protection of an aunt, pretending the world did not know she had been born 6 months too soon after her mother's hasty marriage. If the forged accounts were exposed carelessly, Pike could make the Bowder arrears look like secret payments made to Rosamund for her own use. Worse, he could reveal what Mary Bower had spent years trying to bury under respectability. In London, such a detail would be a scrap of gossip. On an estate, it could follow a girl for life. Rosamund closed her eyes and saw Tamsin's thin wrist hovering above the keys, afraid of making even music too loudly. That was why the page had stayed under her hand. Not because Lucian had no right to the truth, but because powerful men often thought truth cleanest when it was stripped naked in public. Women knew better. Some truths needed clothing before they could survive the room. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Annesley entered without waiting, carrying a shawl and a face that suggested she had expected to find Rosamund awake. If you intend to sit up all night guarding paper, at least let your shoulders be warm. Rosamund accepted the shawl. I am trying to decide whether withholding it makes me unjust. From the Duke? From the investigation, My dear, men call it investigation when they are still learning what women have known for weeks. Mrs. Annesley sat in the second chair. Whose name is on the page? Rosamund looked down. Mary Bowers, and Tamsin's by implication. The widow's expression sharpened. Ah, if Lucian takes her to Harcourt without care, Tamsin's birth becomes ammunition. Pike would use it. Lady Maud would use it if she thought it would darken me. And if you keep it entirely, then Pike may escape through the one account that proves his method. Mrs. Annesley was quiet for several seconds. Then the question is not whether the Duke deserves the page. The question is whether he understands the cost of using it. Rosamund touched the cracked key. He asked what I required, an improvement. I told him protection without ownership, then require it. The next morning, Lucian returned not to the parlour as a husband demanding answer, but to Mrs. Annesley's front room at 11 o'clock, properly announced, gloved and visibly tired. He had left his carriage 2 streets away again. That detail was not lost on Rosamund. Neither was the way he stopped at the threshold, and waited until she inclined her head before entering fully. Mrs. Annesley took her appointed place by the tea table. Lucian remained standing. I received word from Harcourt at dawn, he said. Pike's lodgings have been found empty. He left behind unpaid rent, 2 torn envelopes, and a receipt from a stationer in Chancery Lane. The ink matches the colour used in the forged letter. Rosamund folded her hands. And Lady Maud. She sent 3 notes before breakfast. 1 to Lady Crampton, 1 to Lady Wrexham, 1 to a physician who has attended her household for years. For what purpose? Lucian's mouth tightened. To prepare a story. What story? That you suffered nervous strain. That you imagined disloyalty around you. That I am preserving your dignity by keeping the matter quiet. The room seemed to grow smaller. Mrs. Annesley's teacup stopped halfway to her lips. Rosamund felt the old chill move through her, the one that had lived behind the study door before it had learned her name. A kinder lie, she said. Yes, Lucian's voice was low. A kinder lie that would bury you alive. Rosamund looked at him carefully. And what did you do? I sent a message forbidding the physician to issue any note concerning you. I also wrote to Harcourt and instructed him to engage Mr. Silas Venn, a discreet legal agent who has handled estate fraud without feeding gossip to clubs or papers. He will protect witnesses before collecting statements. Rosamund did not answer at once. Her surprise was not trust, but it stood near it. You thought of the witnesses? No, Lucian said. You taught me to. The honesty struck harder than flattery would have done. He did not use it to approach her. He merely placed a folded paper on the table. This is Venn's undertaking. No tenant names released. No family circumstances discussed beyond what is necessary. No statement taken without protection from retaliation. I had Harcourt put it in writing, because words from me are not enough. Rosamund looked at the paper, but did not touch it. You are learning the shape of caution. I am learning the shape of what I damaged. Mrs. Annesley rose. I shall pretend to examine the kettle in the next room. I will leave the door open. Because propriety is the last useful curtain society gives women. She departed with the door ajar. Rosamund and Lucian stood in the careful half-privacy it allowed. From outside came the faint call of a street seller and the scrape of a broom over steps. The final page concerns the Bower family, Rosamund said. Lucian's eyes changed at once, not with recognition, but attention. South Farm? Yes, Mary Bower owed arrears after her husband's death. I forgave them from my personal pin money and recorded it privately because Lady Maud would have called it indulgence. Pike seems to have noticed the discrepancy and built a false charge around it. And the daughter? Rosamund looked toward the pianoforte. Tamsin studies here. She believes no one knows she is connected to Alder-mere. Her mother married late enough that society could be cruel if it wished to count months. Lucian's face hardened, but not against her. Pike would threaten exposure. So would Lady Maud if she thought it useful. Then the page cannot travel like ordinary evidence. No, he nodded once. I will have Venn take Mary Bower's statement in Hampshire under another pretext. Rent remission, crop loss, nothing touching the girl's birth. Harcourt can confirm the money came from your personal allowance without naming Tamsin. Pike's method can be proved by the false entry, not by the family scandal. Rosamund searched his face for impatience. She found none. That unsettled her more than resistance. You do not ask me to hand it over. I ask you to decide when it is safe. That is not how you sounded in London. Pain moved across his face and was mastered badly. For once, she saw the effort. No. In London, I thought authority made me clear-sighted. It made me deaf. The word hung between them, deaf. She could have struck him with many answers. She chose none of them. Instead, she unlocked the compartment, withdrew the final page, and did not give it to him. She laid it flat on the table where both could read it. A shared surface. No surrender. Lucian understood. He bent over the page without touching it. His eyes moved quickly, then slowed at the notation beside Mary Bower's name. You used your allowance for this? Yes, and told no one. It was not charity for display. He looked up. How many such acts did I fail to see? Rosamund met his gaze. Enough that I stopped hoping you would. Silence followed, not empty silence. Not the locked silence of a corridor. This one held recognition, and because it held recognition, it hurt differently. Lucian reached slowly toward the page, then stopped and withdrew his hand before she needed to ask. May then view it here, in your presence, under the conditions you set? Rosamund breathed out. Yes, it was not forgiveness. It was permission. He received it like a man who knew the difference. Before either could speak again, Mrs. Annesley returned with a folded paper in hand and displeasure in every line of her figure. The town improves its manners by worsening its morals, she said. A gossip sheet from London. It reached the pump room by the Morning Post. Rosamund took it. Lucian came no closer, though his entire body stilled. The paragraph was brief, elegant, and cruel. A certain duchess, long admired for her reserve, is whispered to have been seen in circumstances less elevated than her station. Whether this retreat arises from delicate health, domestic misunderstanding, or a more interesting cause, society waits with sympathetic concern. Rosamund read it once, then she set it down. Her face remained composed, but colour had left her mouth. Lucian looked at the words and understood Lady Maud's genius. The item accused Rosamund of nothing. It merely opened the door and invited London to do the rest. I can stop the next one, he said. You cannot stop curiosity once someone has taught it where to look. Rosamund lifted her eyes to his. Tomorrow's dinner is no longer a choice. Rosamund, no. Her voice was quiet, but it cut clean. If I hide, they will make me illness. If I appear, they will try to make me shame. I prefer a room where I can answer. Lucian looked at the paper, then at the final ledger page, still lying between them. Then I will be there. Beside me, if permitted. Behind me, she said after a moment. Close enough to speak if truth requires it. Not so close that anyone mistakes my courage for your possession. He bowed his head. Behind you, then. For the first time since he had found her, Rosamund believed he heard not only the words, but the boundary inside them. Outside, Bath continued its polite morning. Inside, the final page remained on the table. Protected not by secrecy alone, but by a fragile new rule neither of them dared name as trust. Lady Wrexham's dining room was small enough to feel private, and arranged carefully enough to ensure nothing said within it would remain so. By 8 o'clock, every candle had been lit, every chair placed to flatter rank without appearing to worship it, and every guest instructed by curiosity to pretend indifference. Rosamund entered as Mrs. Rose Merrin, in a gown of dark grey silk, borrowed from Mrs. Annesley, altered at the waist with more honesty than elegance. She wore no jewels, she wore no wedding ring. She carried herself as though both absences had been chosen, rather than suffered, and that was the first thing the room did not forgive. Lucian entered several minutes later, not at her side, not with the possessive timing of a husband reclaiming a runaway wife, but behind her and to the left, precisely where she had told him he might stand if truth required it. The murmur that moved through the room when the Duke of Alder-mere was announced had the soft viciousness of silk drawn over a blade. Lady Wrexham, a plump widow with bright eyes, and a genius for being useful to scandal without ever appearing responsible for it, greeted him with excessive warmth. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honor. Bath is rarely blessed with such consequence at dinner." "Lady Wrexham," Lucian said, "I understand your table values truth. I thought I might observe." The hostess's smile faltered by a fraction. Across the room, Miss Octavia Fenwick stood near the mantel in pale blue, graceful golden brown, and perfectly aware of the effect of appearing surprised. She looked first at Lucian, then at Rosamund, and allowed her eyes to widen just enough for witnesses. Rosamund felt the room lean toward that look. Not physically, that would have been vulgar. But attention has weight, and she had carried enough of it in London to know when it meant to crush. Mrs. Annesley had come with her, seated as her companion and chaperone, lavender silk rustling with controlled disdain, at the table. Rosamund found herself placed between a retired colonel's wife and a clergyman's sister who asked whether she preferred Bath to London, in the tone one used to inquire whether a fallen cake could still be served. "Bath has honest pavements," Rosamund said. "They don't pretend not to be slippery." The clergyman's sister blinked. Mrs. Annesley coughed into her napkin. Lucian, 3 seats away, and slightly behind her line of sight, lowered his gaze to his glass. If he was amused, he did not claim the privilege of showing it. For half an hour, the dinner performed civility. Soup was praised. The fish was declared excellent. Lady Wrexham asked after London hostesses with such care that every answer became a map of who knew what. Rosamund answered little and observed much. Octavia spoke of music, charity, and the sad difficulty of helping women who refused proper guidance. Each sentence drifted toward Rosamund and settled near her plate. "One does admire independence," Octavia said at last, turning her smile upon the table. "Though in a woman of rank, of course, disappearance may be mistaken for distress or guilt." The knife in Lucian's hand stilled. He did not move otherwise. Rosamund felt that restraint beside her like a door held open, not closed. Lady Wrexham gave a tinkling laugh.
"My dear Miss Fenwick, you speak in riddles. We are not in London."
"We require names in Bath, or we become quite lost." Octavia lowered her lashes, then lifted them toward Rosamund. "Then perhaps Mrs. Merrin will help us. Or should I say Her Grace, the Duchess of Alder-mere." The table went silent so quickly that the candles seemed suddenly audible. A footman near the sideboard froze with a wine decanter in hand. The clergyman's sister stared. Lady Wrexham did not hide her delight fast enough. Rosamund set down her spoon. Her heart had struck once, hard, but her hands did not tremble. This was not the study corridor. This time the door was open, and every eye was inside the room with her. Lucian shifted, a small motion, almost nothing. She knew without looking that he was ready to speak. She spoke first. "Yes," she said. The word was clear, level, and without apology. Octavia's smile sharpened. "Then it is true. You have been living here under another name. It is true that I have been living quietly. Away from your husband, away from a falsehood." A murmur trembled around the table. Lady Wrexham pressed one hand to her pearls. "How extraordinary." Octavia leaned forward with the sympathy of a woman offering poison in a crystal glass. "I can't imagine what sorrow would drive a duchess to such circumstances. Unless, of course, sorrow was not the cause. London whispers of estate money, missing papers, and a letter in your own hand. There it was, not hinted, not softened, named." Rosamund looked at Octavia and understood something useful. Her enemies expected shame to make her small. They had never considered that shame, once survived, could become a kind of height. "London whispers because London enjoys hearing itself speak," Rosamund said. "I do not answer to whispers." Octavia's eyes flicked toward Lucian. "Perhaps you answer to His Grace, then." Rosamund turned her head just enough to see him. His face was pale with controlled fury, but he did not seize the moment from her. He waited. The sight steadied her more than defense would have done. "I answer to truth," she said, "and the truth is simple. I did not steal from Alder-mere. I did not forge my own name. I did not flee exposure. I left a house where I had been judged before I had been heard. The room changed. It was not belief yet. Belief rarely arrived so quickly when disbelief had been made entertaining, but the certainty in her voice deprived the table of its easy feast. Lady Wrexham glanced at Lucian. "Your Grace?" "Surely you must clarify this unhappy misunderstanding." Lucian rose. Chairs creaked. The room seemed to shrink under his rank, but his eyes were on Rosamund, not the hostesses, not Octavia, not the waiting faces. "There is no misunderstanding in the point Her Grace has just made," he said. "No one at this table will call my wife a thief without proof." Octavia recovered first. "How noble!" "But surely the letter—" "A forged letter," Lucian said. The two words landed with less volume than a shout, and more force than one. "The matter is under inquiry." "Then there is an inquiry," Octavia said quickly. "How distressing for Her Grace." "Distressing for those who forged it," Lucian replied. "Less comfortable still for those who helped the lie travel." Octavia's colour altered. Lady Wrexham looked suddenly fascinated by the salt cellar. Rosamund felt a dangerous warmth move through her chest, not relief exactly, and not forgiveness. It was the first fragile recognition of what protection sounded like, when it did not attempt to own the woman being protected. The retired colonel's wife, who had been silent until then, cleared her throat. "If Her Grace says she did not do it, and His Grace says the letter was forged, I don't see what good is served by chewing the matter over fish." Her husband, who had not been invited to speak, but seemed delighted by his wife's courage, muttered, "Quite right." The table, having sensed a change in wind, began rearranging its morals. Lady Wrexham ordered the next course to her brightly. Octavia smiled again, but the polish had thinned. For the rest of dinner, conversation limped through safer subjects. Rosamund ate enough to prove she was not shattered, and little enough to avoid choking on triumph that had not yet been earned. Lucian did not attempt to catch her eye. That, too, she noticed. He had defended her name, but he did not ask payment in gratitude. When the ladies withdrew, Octavia contrived to pass near Rosamund in the drawing-room, before the gentlemen rejoined them. "You play your part well," she murmured, "but dignity doesn't mend a reputation once society has tasted scandal." Rosamund looked at her calmly. "Then it is fortunate I am not offering society supper." Octavia's smile vanished for one heartbeat. "You should have stayed hidden. So many people seem to have preferred me silent. I begin to think my voice has value." Mrs. Annesley appeared at Rosamund's elbow before Octavia could answer. "Miss Fenwick, Lady Wrexham is searching for someone to admire her fire screen. You look equal to the task." Octavia withdrew with a shallow laugh. The gentlemen returned moments later, and with them Lucian, whose gaze found Rosamund's face once and asked nothing aloud. That restraint nearly undid her. Not because it was grand, but because it was small enough to be real. The evening ended without open disaster, which in society meant the disaster would be written privately before midnight. As they left, Lucian offered his arm in the hall. Rosamund looked at it, then at him. He lowered it at once. "Forgive me," he said softly. "Habit isn't the same as right." "No," she said, "it is not." Mrs. Annesley waited with her cloak, pretending not to hear. A gust of damp air entered when the footman opened the door. Across the street, beyond the glow of Lady Wrexham's lamps, a narrow man in a dark coat paused beneath a shop awning. Rosamund saw him only because Lucian did. The Duke's entire posture changed, not loudly but completely. "Pike," he said. The man turned his face. For an instant, lamplight caught sharp cheekbones, anxious eyes, and a mouth that opened as if to deny his own name. Then he slipped behind a passing carriage and vanished into the Bath night. Lucian was already at the threshold when Rosamund spoke. "Do not chase him through the street like a melodrama." He stopped. The old Lucian might not have. "My man is at the corner," he said. "I'll send him." Quietly. "Good." She drew a folded page from inside her glove. The final ledger sheet felt heavier than paper should. "You may need this now." He looked at it, but did not take it until she extended it fully. "Are you certain?" "No," Rosamund said. "But certainty is a luxury he may not leave us." Lucian accepted the page as if receiving something sacred and dangerous. His thumb did not touch her glove. Their eyes met in the yellow spill of carriage light. Behind them, Lady Wrexham's house still hummed with guests, eager to repeat what they had seen. Before them, Pike had disappeared with fear in his face. Rosamund lifted her chin. Now protect the truth properly. Lucian folded the page once and placed it inside his coat. I will. For the first time, she almost believed the promise. Lady Maud Carriages received Octavia Fenwick's note at breakfast, and did not smile until she was certain no servant remained close enough to report it. The Mayfair morning had begun with rain against the windows, a silver pot of chocolate gone lukewarm, and 3 unopened calling cards arranged beside her plate like small white accusations. London had already noticed that the Duchess of Alder-mere was not receiving. London had noticed even more that the Duke had ceased permitting explanations. That, in Lady Maud's view, was Lucian's first mistake. Silence, unless shaped by a skilled hand, invited inferior imaginations to work. She broke Octavia's pale green seal with a fruit knife and read the single sentence twice. I believe the Duchess is hiding in Bath. For a moment, the room around her seemed to settle into its proper order. Not because Rosamund had been found. Found women could still speak. The pleasure lay in the word hiding. A woman who hid gave society permission to invent what she lacked the courage to say. Lady Maud folded the note and placed it beneath her saucer. Rosamund had always been troublesome in the quietest possible way. Too dutiful to fault openly, too observant to dismiss safely, too beloved by servants, tenants, and sentimental widows who mistook soft manners for virtue. For 3 years, Maud had watched her nephew's wife become necessary to Alder-mere by inches. A corrected account here. A sick maid sheltered there. A tenant's petition answered before it reached Lucian's desk. None of it grand enough to challenge. All of it dangerous if allowed to accumulate into influence. The true threat of Rosamund was never disobedience. It was competence without vanity. Such women were hard to shame because they did not ask admiration to survive, but everyone could be given a story. Maud rang for her writing case. By noon, 3 letters had left Alder-mere House. The first went to Lady Crampton, whose charitable heart beat fastest in the presence of other people's domestic misfortune. The second went to Lady Wrexham in Bath, thanking her for her kindness to a certain lady, whose delicate condition required discretion. The third went by private messenger to Dr. Abel Finch, a physician who had attended Maud's household for enough years to understand that gratitude sometimes looked very much like obedience. Maud's wording was delicate. She did not call Rosamund mad. Vulgarity was for people without rank. She wrote instead of nervous exhaustion, strain, unsettled impressions, and the danger of permitting a sensitive lady to be harried by unfounded worries over accounts she could not fully understand. By the time the ink dried, Rosamund had been transformed from a wronged duchess into a fragile one. It was far more useful. A criminal could defend herself. A fragile woman could be praised into silence. Octavia arrived at 2:30, bright-eyed despite the journey, wearing a soft green traveling dress that flattered both youth and plausible innocence. Maud received her in the small drawing room, away from the main hall where Mrs. Bell had begun to move, with the controlled suspicion of a woman who saw more than her station permitted her to say. You were unwise to name her at dinner, Maud said before Octavia could sit. Octavia's smile faltered. I did what was necessary. Half the room knows now. His Grace defended her, but that only made the scene more interesting. Interest is not control. No, Octavia said, recovering, but it is appetite. You can control what appetite is fed. Maud regarded her with renewed approval. Miss Fenwick was vain, certainly. Ambitious, beyond question. Yet vanity and ambition were not flaws when guided by someone older. They were harnesses. Lucian must not be forced too quickly, Maud said. If he feels cornered, he becomes obstinate. He must be made to believe that preserving Rosamund's dignity requires limiting her voice. Octavia removed her gloves finger by finger, and if he refuses, then he must fear what her voice will do to the family name. Octavia leaned closer. She looked different in Bath, reduced? No. The admission seemed to irritate her. Sharper, quieter. People listened when she spoke. Maud's hand stilled on the arm of her chair. Then we must teach them to listen with pity instead of respect. That evening, while London carried Maud's version from tea table to carriage step, Lucian stood in Harcourt's office with Rosamund's final page laid beneath a green-shaded lamp. He had not slept properly since she left, and fatigue had cut the handsome severity of his face into something more human and less useful. Harcourt read in silence. Silas Venn, the discreet legal agent, stood near the window, a compact man of 40, with plain clothes, observant eyes, and the air of someone who had learned that truth often entered rooms through servant doors. "The Bower account can prove method," Ben said at last, "but Her Grace is right. If handled carelessly, the girl's history becomes the scandal rather than the fraud." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Then it will not be handled carelessly. We'll need the widow's statement under a neutral pretext," Ben said. "Crop loss, rent remission, estate relief. Nothing to do with the daughter. If Pike threatens the family, we can use that threat against him without naming its object." Harcourt nodded. "Pike was seen in Bath last night, then lost. My man believes he took a seat on the morning coach toward London under the name Percival. He is running to the person who pays him," Lucian said. Venn looked at him, or from her. Before Lucian could answer, a clerk entered with a sealed packet. Harcourt broke it, read, and swore softly enough that only a gentleman would have recognized the violence of it. "Your Grace, Dr. Finch has been approached." Lucian took the paper. The physician's reply was cautious, but not cautious enough. Lady Maud had requested his professional recollection of the Duchess's recent agitation, her pallor, her reserve, and whether such a lady might require removal from public strain for her own good. Finch had not written a certificate, not yet, but he had agreed to attend a private family consultation if His Grace desired it. Lucian placed the note on the desk. His hand remained flat over it. "She is building a cage and calling it care." Harcourt's expression was grave. "If a physician suggests nervous exhaustion, society may accept it more readily than fraud. Because fraud demands proof," Ben said. "Pity demands only posture." Lucian turned toward the window. Outside, London moved through mist and lamplight, unaware that a woman's entire character could be redrawn before dinner by people who never raised their voices. He thought of Rosamund at Lady Wrexham's table, answering for herself with no ring on her hand and no tremor in her voice. He had been proud of her. The realization still had the power to hurt. Pride came easily when the person one had failed began surviving without permission. "Send to Finch," Lucian said. "He is not to issue any statement concerning Her Grace. Not private, not public, not implied." Harcourt dipped his pen. "In your name?" Lucian paused. A week ago, he would have said yes without thought. Now the word tasted wrong. "In the name of propriety and professional caution." "My name may follow if he proves slow to understand." Venn gave the faintest nod. "Better. A frightened physician speaks. A cautious one delays." The door opened again, this time to admit a note from Alder-mere House. Mrs. Bell's handwriting was firm. Lady Maud had requested access to household charity lists, Rosamund's old invitations, and correspondence samples kept for seating arrangements. Mrs. Bell had refused until instructed by His Grace. Lucian read the line twice. Correspondence samples. The air in the room changed. Harcourt saw it too, handwriting. "Octavia," Lucian said. "She had invitations from Rosamund, notes from musical evenings, small things no one would guard." Venn's voice remained mild. "Small things are what forgers prefer. No one remembers where they set them down." Lucian folded Mrs. Bell's note and placed it in his coat. "Lady Maud is removed from household accounts as of this hour. Mrs. Bell will receive written authority. The steward from Alder-mere Hall is to come to London. I want every copy made in the last 6 months traced." Harcourt looked relieved to have orders that moved. "At once, and send to Bath," Lucian added. "Her Grace must know what is being done in her name." He stopped himself. "No, not in her name, against her." By the following afternoon, Rosamund read Lucian's letter in Mrs. Annesley's parlour while rain ran down the glass, and the London gossip sheet lay open beside her like a polite wound. Lucian's handwriting was spare, controlled. and clearer than his speech had ever been in their marriage. He told her of Dr. Finch, of Maud's letters, of the request for old correspondence, of the steward being summoned. He did not ask her to return. He did not tell her to trust him. At the end, he had written only this: I begin to understand that they do not need to prove you guilty if they can persuade the world you are too delicate to be believed. I should have understood sooner. Rosamund read that final sentence more than once. Mrs. Annesley watched her from the opposite chair. That is a useful sentence, the widow said. Not a sufficient one, no. Rosamund folded the letter. But useful. Will you answer? Rosamund looked at the gossip sheet. The newest paragraph had already softened the blade. A certain duchess, perhaps more to be pitied than censured, is said to have placed undue strain upon herself in matters of estate management. Friends hope rest and domestic kindness may soon restore her to her proper sphere. Proper sphere. The phrase was a velvet rope drawn across her mouth. Yes, she said, I will answer. She took out paper and wrote with care. Your Grace, do not let them make my composure into illness or my silence into confession. If Dr. Finch writes one word about my nerves, he must first be asked when he examined my conscience. Mrs. Annesley laughed once. Low and delighted, Rosamund continued. Protect the Bower family before you pursue Pike through that page. Remove Lady Maud from every paper she can touch. Ask who had my old invitations. Ask Miss Fenwick why she recognized me before Bath was meant to know my face. And do not confuse shame for reparation. When she finished, her hand was steady. She sealed the letter, then sat back as the room darkened toward evening. Across the street, two women paused beneath an umbrella and looked up toward her window. One whispered. The other smiled with sympathy, so practiced it felt like insult even through glass. Rosamund did not step back this time. She let them see the outline of her face behind the curtain. Not hidden. Not displayed. Present. That night, in London, Lucian received her letter at Alder-mere house, where Lady Maud had already arranged a private family consultation for the following morning. The proposed statement lay on his desk, written in Maud's elegant hand and waiting for his signature. It did not accuse Rosamund. It praised her. It called her overburdened, tender, confused, and unfit for public duties until restored by quiet care. Lucian read it once, while Rosamund's letter lay open beside it. The two papers seemed to look at one another across the desk like enemies. Then Lady Maud entered without knocking, dressed black silk and certainty. Sign it, Lucian, she said. It's the merciful thing. Lucian looked at the place left blank for his name. For the first time, he understood how cruelty could arrive wearing gloves, carrying smelling salts, and calling itself mercy. Lucian did not sign Lady Maud's statement. But he made the mistake of letting the paper remain on his desk, long enough for silence to look like consideration. By 10 o'clock the next morning, the small library at Alder-mere House had become a chamber of polished pressure. Harcourt stood near the mantel with his briefcase unopened. Dr. Finch sat stiffly beside a table he clearly wished were farther from the Duke. Lord Harkham, Lady Maud's elder brother, and a man whose age had made his opinions heavier than his rank deserved, rested both hands upon his cane and watched Lucian with grave disappointment. Lady Maud occupied the chair nearest the writing desk, dressed in black silk and domestic sorrow. The statement lay between them. Every line crafted to praise Rosamund out of power, delicate strain, excessive sensibility, a temporary withdrawal from public duties, quiet care beneath her husband's protection, no accusation, no defense. Only velvet wrapped around a locked door. It is not a punishment, Lady Maud said. It is preservation. Lucian stood at the window, looking out at a London morning too bright for the conversation it held. It is a lie. Dr. Finch cleared his throat. Your Grace, with respect, a lady may be overwrought without being blamed. Her Grace has always appeared pale and reserved. If the family believes a season of rest would quiet speculation, a carefully worded note might spare her harsher talk. You have not examined her Grace. No, Your Grace. You have not spoken with her. No, then you will write nothing concerning her condition. Finch lowered his gaze. As Your Grace wishes. Lady Maud leaned forward. Lucian, don't bully a physician for trying to protect a woman who has already exposed herself to scandal. Rosamund did not expose herself. Others exposed their appetite for her ruin. Lord Harkham's cane struck the carpet once, soft but deliberate. This is not about appetite. This is about a family name. I have known your aunt since she was a girl. She may be severe, but she is never careless. If she fears your wife is not equal to public strain, you should ask whether affection has made you blind. Affection. The word entered the room and unsettled Lucian more than accusation. Had he earned the right to be thought affectionate? He had defended Rosamund in Bath. He had sent agents, traced ink, guarded the Bower name. Yet when faced with his aunt, a physician, an elder relative, and the shadow of a scandal large enough to stain Alder-mere, some old instinct still whispered that containment was safer than truth. He hated that instinct. He hated more that it did not die merely because he now recognized it. Harcourt spoke carefully. Your Grace, the statement should not be signed. However, there may be value in delaying any public contradiction until Venn secures Pike. Lucian turned. A day, perhaps 2. If we accuse Lady Maud's circle without Pike in hand, the matter may become contest instead of proof. Lady Maud's eyes warmed with the first sign of victory. Censal, at last. Lucian looked at the blank space where his signature was meant to go. He thought of Rosamund's letter. Do not confuse shame for reparation. I will not sign. The words should have been enough. They were not. Lady Maud heard what he had not said. So did Harcourt. So, worst of all did Lucian. He had not said, my wife is sound. He had not said, anyone who questions her truth answers to me. He had rejected the paper, but not destroyed the room that had dared produce it. Lady Maud rose slowly. Then we shall leave the matter unsettled for the moment. No statement leaves this house, Lucian said. Of course. Her obedience was too swift. By noon, a softer version had already left through a lady's maid with a cousin in Mayfair, and by evening it had reached Bath as all damaging things travelled, altered just enough to avoid responsibility. Mrs. Annesley received it from a friend who still believed warnings were a form of kindness. She carried the note upstairs without removing her gloves. Rosamund was at the pianoforte with Tamsin Bower, guiding the girl's hand through a difficult passage. One look at the widow's face ended the lesson. Miss Bower, Mrs. Annesley said, go down to the parlour and ask cook for tea. Tell her I said the good biscuits, not the penitential ones. Tamsin fled with grateful confusion. Rosamund stood. What has happened? Mrs. Annesley handed her the note. Rosamund read quickly. His Grace refused to sign, but would not deny that her Grace's condition had been discussed. The family may wait upon further evidence before correcting the impression. The paper did not fall from her hand. That would have been too generous to the people who had tired her. Instead, she folded it once, then again each crease exact. He did not sign, Mrs. Annesley said. No, that is something. Rosamund looked toward the window. A closed door is also something. It can be made of oak or silence or caution. It still keeps a woman outside. The widow sighed. Will you write to him? Not yet. Will you disappear again? Rosamund touched the cracked ivory key resting above the gap in the old keyboard. No. The answer surprised even her in its steadiness. That is what they expect. A frightened woman who can be explained after she is gone. She knelt before the instrument and pressed the key into place. The brass catch released. The hidden compartment opened. She removed the copied ledger pages, the final Bower sheet, and beneath them the earliest proof of all, a small list she had made weeks before leaving London. Names of every person who had borrowed, handled, or copied her correspondence. At the bottom was Miss Octavia Fenwick, marked beside 3 musical invitations and 1 note of thanks, written in Rosamund's hand. Rosamund had not understood the significance then. Now it gleamed with awful simplicity. Octavia had not merely recognized her in Bath. Octavia had known exactly which handwriting could be stolen. There, Rosamund said softly. I was not imagining shadows. Mrs. Annesley read over her shoulder. No, my dear. You were standing in a room full of people carrying candles and calling it darkness. Before Rosamund could answer, a hard knock sounded below. A messenger had come from Ven. Pike had been found near an old counting room off Holborn, trying to burn a copied account book in the grate before Ven's men entered. No force had been needed. Pike had panicked at the sight of a solicitor's warrant and dropped the book, half-scorched, on the hearth rug. Lucian himself had arrived within minutes and pulled the damaged volume from the ashes with his gloved hands before the ink was lost. The note contained one more line, written by Ven, not Lucian. His Grace asks that Her Grace know the book was saved, but that he understands a saved book does not prepare an unsaid sentence. Rosamund read that line twice. It struck too close to mercy. She set the note beside the gossip warning and the list from the compartment. 3 papers, 3 truths. Lucian had failed her again, but not as he had failed before. This time he had known he failed. This time he had named the wound without asking her to dress it for him. It still hurt. The knowledge did not soften it. "I am going to London," she said. Mrs. Annesley's eyes narrowed. "For him? No." Rosamund lifted the list. "For myself. For Mary Bower. For every servant and tenant, whose name they thought could be arranged beneath mine like kindling. When? Tomorrow morning. In whose carriage? Mine, if I must hire it with wages, not his." Mrs. Annesley smiled then, not kindly but with fierce approval. "Excellent. Never let a man carry you to a room where you intend to stand." That night, Rosamund packed as she had left London, with restraint so complete it looked almost cold. 1 dark gown, the ledger copies, the list of handwriting samples, the cracked ivory key wrapped in linen. She did not pack the borrowed name. Mrs. Rose Merrin had served her purpose. At dawn, before Bath had fully opened its shutters, Rosamund sat at Mrs. Annesley's desk and wrote 1 calling card in her true hand. Not a letter, not an explanation, not a plea. Lady Maud had used drawing rooms, physicians, gossip, and family pressure to make Rosamund a subject of discussion. Rosamund would answer by becoming the hostess of the discussion herself. She wrote the words slowly, with the same hand someone had tried to steal, and the same dignity no one had managed to forge. "The Duchess will receive Lady Maud tomorrow." She sanded the ink, sealed the card, and gave it to the waiting messenger. Only then did she look at Mrs. Annesley. "If His Grace asks to ride with me, tell him I have already gone. And if he follows," Rosamund drew on her gloves, "then for once he may arrive after me." By noon, the card reached Alder-mere house. Lady Maud read it in the drawing room and went very still. Lucian, standing near the mantel with soot still faintly marking 1 glove from Pike's half-burned book, saw his wife's handwriting and understood before anyone spoke that Rosamund was no longer hiding from the room. She was taking it back. Rosamund returned to Alder-mere House in full daylight, when London could see the carriage wheels stop before the door, and no one could pretend she had been smuggled back under pity. She had hired the carriage herself from Bath, paid the driver from wages earned by teaching music, and sat through the journey with the ledger packet on her lap and the cracked ivory key sewn into the lining of her glove. Mrs. Annesley had wanted to accompany her all the way, but Rosamund had refused with gratitude. "This room was built without me," she had said before leaving. "I must be the one to enter it." Now the black door of Alder-mere House opened before the footman could knock twice, and Mrs. Bell stood in the hall in her dark housekeeper's gown, composed as stone until Rosamund crossed the threshold. Then the older woman's face altered. Not much. Only enough for Rosamund to know she had been missed by someone who understood the difference between absence and abandonment. "Your Grace," Mrs. Bell said, and curtsied deeply. The title did not feel like a chain this time. It felt like a key returned to the proper hand. Rosamund looked at the silver tray. The lilies were gone. In their place lay the household keys, polished, silent, and waiting. "His Grace ordered them kept there until your return," Mrs. Bell said. Rosamund removed her gloves slowly. The wedding ring was not on her hand. She saw Mrs. Bell notice and, mercifully, ask nothing. Rosamund lifted the keys. They were heavier than she remembered. Or perhaps she was stronger now and could feel their weight honestly. "Thank you, Mrs. Bell. The drawing room will be prepared at 2 o'clock. Lady Maud is to attend." Miss Fenwick, Mr. Harcourt, Mr. Venn, and Mr. Pike as well if Mr. Venn has secured him. His Grace may attend if he understands that I have not returned to be spoken over. A voice answered from the far end of the hall. I understand. Lucian stood near the study door, pale from too many sleepless nights, his right glove still faintly marked from the half-burned account book. He did not move toward her. He did not say her name as plea or command. He bowed deeply enough that 2 footmen forgot to look elsewhere. Rosamund inclined her head. Your Grace. The formality struck him. She saw it and did not soften it. The drawing room, she said. At 2. At 2, he replied. The room will be yours. Lady Maud arrived 5 minutes late, which was her way of pretending she had not been summoned. Octavia Fenwick arrived exactly on time, dressed in pale muslin and innocence, with a little tremor arranged in her mouth. Mr. Harcourt came with papers. Silas Venn brought Gideon Pike, who looked smaller in daylight than he had in suspicion, a narrow man with nervous hands and eyes that never rested long on any face. Lucian entered last and took a position behind Rosamund's chair, not beside it, not above it. The room noticed. Lady Maud noticed most of all. This is unnecessary, she said before Rosamund had fully seated herself. If you wish to return, my dear, no one required theatrics. Rosamund placed the ledger packet on the table. I did not return for theatrics. I returned because too many quiet lies have been entertained in this house. Octavia lowered her eyes. How painful. I had hoped Bath might give your Grace peace. Bath gave me witnesses, Rosamund said. Peace can wait. Lady Maud's fan opened with a soft snap. Lucian, surely you will not permit your wife to expose herself to further distress. Lucian did not look at his aunt. Her Grace has the floor. The sentence was simple. It changed the room. Rosamund felt it pass through every person present. For once, authority did not take the words from her. It guarded the space around them. She opened the packet. 3 weeks before I left this house, I found irregular entries in the South Farm accounts. Rents recorded twice. Repair charges attached to no repair. Private relief funds made to appear as secret payments. At first I thought the errors careless. Then I found my own signature, beside authorizations I had never written. Pike licked his lips. Many ladies forget what they've signed. Not when the forger presses harder on the final stroke, Rosamund said. She laid down 2 sheets. This is my hand. This is the imitation. Mr. Harcourt has already observed the difference in pressure. Mr. Venn has confirmed that the same blue-black ink was ordered for your office, Mr. Pike. 1 week before the forged letter appeared. Pike looked toward Lady Maud. She did not look back. I ordered ink because clerks use ink, he said. A grave confession, Mrs. Bell murmured from the doorway, so quietly that only Rosamund nearly smiled. Lady Maud's eyes cut toward the housekeeper. Lucian took 1 step forward, Mrs. Bell remains. Servants as witnesses now, Lady Maud asked. Mrs. Bell guarded the papers you attempted to remove from the household files, Lucian said. She remains. Rosamund continued before gratitude could unsteady her. The next matter is correspondence. Miss Fenwick, you possessed 3 invitations and 1 thank-you note written by me last season. Octavia blinked beautifully. I received many notes I couldn't possibly remember. Mr. Venn asked your maid. She remembered because the notes were kept in a green ribbon beneath your writing case. She thought them sentimental. Color touched Octavia's cheeks. My maid has no right to speak of my possessions. Truth often has no invitation, Rosamund said. She placed another page on the table. The forged letter used my capital R from a musical invitation, my final D from a dinner note, and the phrasing of an estate instruction stolen from household correspondence. This is absurd, Octavia said. I had no need to imitate you. Not personally, Rosamund replied, but someone needed samples. Pike's hands began to worry the edge of his hat. Lady Maud saw it and intervened smoothly. Even if some foolish clerk copied a hand, that does not explain your flight, Rosamund. An innocent wife does not vanish before dawn. The words tried to reopen the old wound before everyone. Rosamund felt it. She let the room feel her silence before she answered. An innocent wife may leave when she hears herself condemned through a closed door by the man to whom she brought proof. Lucian went very still behind her. No one else moved. Lady Maud's face lost a shade of colour. Octavia looked quickly at Lucian, searching for embarrassment to use. He gave her none. Her Grace speaks the truth, he said. I failed to hear her. That failure is mine. It does not make her guilty. Rosamund did not turn. If she had, she might have lost the thread of the room to the ache in his voice. Instead, she drew the final item from the packet. A copy of the list taken from the pianoforte compartment. Before leaving, I sent evidence to Bath. The cracked ivory key from my mother's instrument opened the compartment where these copies were kept. I did so because I already feared documents in this house could be altered. How dramatic, Octavia whispered. How prudent, Harcourt corrected. Venn placed the half-burned account book on the table. Its edges were blackened, but the inner entries remained legible. This was recovered from a grate off Holborn, he said. Mr. Pike was present. Pike's face shone with perspiration. I didn't write the first letter. The words came out too quickly. The room seized upon them. Lucian's voice was low. The first letter. Pike looked as if he had stepped into a hole of his own making. Lady Maud closed her fan. Gideon, be silent. Rosamund's pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. No, let him speak. I only copied what I was given, Pike said. I adjusted the accounts. I made the entries look as if Her Grace had directed funds. But the first packet, the one that made His Grace believe she was trading estate information, that wasn't mine. Lady Maud rose. This man is frightened. He will say anything. Lucian moved at last, not toward Pike, but to the door, where he stood between Lady Maud and exit without touching either. Sit down, Aunt. The command was quiet enough to be respectable and absolute enough to be ducal. Lady Maud sat. Pike swallowed. I was paid through a debt note. Lady Maud arranged that, yes. But the handwriting samples came through Miss Fenwick, and the first packet came from someone who wanted Her Grace gone before the accounts were even questioned. Octavia's lips parted. You liar. I kept copies, Pike said, desperation making him bold. Not because I meant harm. Because ladies and gentlemen forget clerks when blame begins. Venn's gaze sharpened. Where are the copies? Pike looked at Rosamund, then at Lucian, then finally at Lady Maud. Hidden with a man who knows better than to burn paper for aristocrats. Rosamund felt the room tilt toward the next truth. The first reversal was complete, but the deeper plot had just opened. Lady Maud's perfect control had cracked. Octavia's pity had vanished. Lucian stood silent, guarding the door she had chosen to open. Rosamund placed both hands on the table and rose. Then we shall hear whose convenience required my erasure, she said. And this time, no one will call it mercy. Pike's confession did not burst open the room. It seeped into it, cold and undeniable, until every polished surface in the drawing room seemed to reflect a different face from the one its owner had worn an hour before. Octavia Fenwick stood beside the sofa, with one gloved hand pressed to her waist, no longer pale from innocence, but from calculation interrupted. Lady Maud remained seated. Her fan closed across her lap, like a small weapon laid down only because too many eyes were upon it. Rosamund stood at the table, the half-burned account book before her, the copied ledger pages arranged in careful order, and the list from the pianoforte compartment beneath her right hand. She had spent 3 years in this house, being praised for composure when obedience was meant. Now composure served a different master. It made room for truth. Lucian stood by the door, not as jailer, not as rescuer, but as the first wall between the truth and escape. Continue, Rosamund said. Pike looked at Lucian. Lucian's voice was quiet. Her Grace asked you. The clerk swallowed. Miss Fenwick gave me the samples. I didn't know why at first. Invitations, little notes, replies about music and dinner. Ladies keep such things. I was told it was harmless. Octavia laughed once. Too light and too late. How theatrical. Am I to be ruined because I saved correspondence? Half of London keeps notes from duchesses. Half of London did not pass them to a clerk who forged my hand, Rosamund said. Octavia's eyes flashed. I didn't forge anything. No, Pike said quickly. You didn't write it. You said you wanted the hand imitated well enough to trouble the house, not well enough for court. Silence followed. Even Lady Maud looked at him then, and Pike seemed to realize he had spoken more plainly than fear intended. Harcourt leaned forward. Repeat that. Pike clutched his hat. She said it didn't need to survive a court, only a husband. The sentence struck with such precise cruelty that the room went still. Rosamund did not look at Lucian. She could feel his reaction behind her, not as movement, but as a change in the air. He had been the weak hinge in the plot, not because he was foolish, because he had been proud, wounded, and accustomed to believing that control was the same as judgment. Octavia lifted her chin. This is beneath answer. Then answer what is above you, Rosamund said. Why did you keep my notes under a green ribbon? Why did your maid remember Pike's name? Why did you recognize me in Bath before anyone there had been properly told I was missing? Octavia's mask wavered. Everyone recognized you eventually. Not eventually. Immediately. Rosamund took one step around the table. You watched me as though you had been waiting for proof that I had fallen far enough. Octavia's face sharpened, and for the first time, the sweetness left her voice entirely. You were wasting a chair you never valued. Mrs. Bell, still at the doorway, drew in the faintest breath. Lady Maud closed her eyes for half a second, as if the younger woman had committed the unforgivable sin of honesty. Rosamund held Octavia's gaze. My chair, at dinners, at charitable boards. Beside his grace in every room where you sat like a saint, carved from ice. You had Alder-mere, and you made everyone feel guilty for noticing you, did nothing with it. I managed the household. The estate correspondence, the servants' welfare, the tenants' petitions, and the accounts you tried to corrupt. Quiet things, Octavia snapped. Invisible things. Any competent housekeeper could have done half of it. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. Rosamund did not rise to the insult. That restraint angered Octavia more. Lady Maud understood what Alder-mere required. Octavia continued, a hostess with charm. A woman who could gather society, guide opinion, flatter influence. Not a wife who drifted through rooms as if suffering made her superior. Lucian spoke then. Enough. Octavia turned toward him with sudden reckless hope. No, Your Grace, it isn't enough. You know what people said. They wondered why you kept her beside you when she gave you no warmth. No brightness, no advantage. I would have protected your position. I would have made Alder-mere admired. Lucian's face did not change, but his voice lost all warmth. Alder-mere was protected by the woman you tried to erase. Octavia flinched. Lady Maud rose. This is indecent. Miss Fenwick is overwrought. Rosamund looked at her. How quickly you find nerves when a woman says something inconvenient. Harcourt made a small sound that might have been a cough. Pike, emboldened by no loyalty remaining to save him, continued. Lady Maud paid my debt to Mr. Rusk through a note. I was to adjust the accounts, make her Grace appear involved, and produce the letter if his Grace hesitated. Miss Fenwick gave samples. The ink came through my office. The physician's note was to be used after her Grace left or protested. It was meant to make her seem unreliable. And the first packet? Venn asked from beside the mantel. Pike hesitated. Copies are with Rusk. He keeps rooms near Gray's Inn. He wanted payment before handing them back. Lucian looked to Venn. The agent nodded once, already understanding the order before it was spoken. Quietly, Rosamund said. Venn turned to her. Yes, Your Grace, quietly. The title sounded different from him than it had from others. Not decorative. Exact. Octavia looked around the room as if searching for sympathy that had been present only when she did not need it. If you ruin me, she said, and her voice had thinned but not softened, I won't fall alone. I will tell everyone His Grace's cruelty drove you from this house. I will say he cursed you, ignored you, broke you, and then dressed revenge as justice when you returned. At last Rosamund turned toward Lucian. The threat was cruel because pieces of it were true. His face was pale, but he did not look away from her. She may say it, he said. She may say I failed you. I will not deny that part to save myself. Octavia stared at him. You would let that be known? I will state it myself before witnesses if that is what truth requires. Lady Maud gripped the back of the chair. Lucian, think. I am thinking clearly for the first time in years. He moved from the door to the table, but stopped before he reached Rosamund. Miss Fenwick, any further insult to her grace, any whisper concerning her sanity, her honesty, or her place in this house, will answer directly to me. But my authority is not the point. He looked at Rosamund then, and the room seemed to recede from both of them. Her choice is. The words were not a plea. They were a surrender of claim. That made them harder to bear. Rosamund lowered her eyes to the papers on the table, because paper, at least, did not ask her heart to move faster than justice. There will be a formal reckoning at Alder-mere Hall, she said. Not a rumor answered by rumor. Not a family whisper, corrected by another whisper. Those who heard the scandal will hear the truth. The steward will attend. The rector will attend. Mr. Harcourt and Mr. Venn will attend. Select witnesses from society will attend. The tenants whose interests were used will be protected, not displayed. Lady Maud gave a brittle laugh. You would parade private shame before half a county. No, Rosamund said. I would end the habit of calling private cruelty family dignity. Pike sank into a chair without permission. Octavia stood rigid, stripped of softness. Maud seemed older, though no less dangerous. Lucian rang the bell. When Havers appeared, Lucian gave orders in a voice that carried the old ducal command, but not its old blindness. Messages to Alder-mere Hall. The steward summoned at once. Rooms prepared for witnesses. A private rider sent for Venn's man near Gray's Inn. No letters to leave the house without Mrs. Bell's knowledge. No caller admitted to Lady Maud without his approval. Lady Maud's face tightened at the last command. She had been mistress of corridors for too long to enjoy discovering doors could close against her. When the others were removed or escorted away, Rosamund remained in the drawing-room, gathering the papers herself. Lucian stayed by the mantel, waiting until the last servant had gone. I won't ask for forgiveness tonight, he said. His voice was low enough not to trespass. I haven't earned the right to ask. Rosamund kept folding the pages. No, he accepted it. At Alder-mere Hall, I will say what I should have said in this house. I believed a forged letter over your character. I let my aunt's story stand nearer to me than my wife did. I made silence look like judgment. Then wondered why you left it. Her hands stilled. He did not come closer. I don't say that to make you pity me, he said. I say it so you know I understand the shape of the wrong. At least the edge of it. Rosamund placed the cracked ivory key into her reticule. The edge is not the wound. I know. Outside the windows, London afternoon had dulled toward evening. For a moment, they were again in a house full of closed doors. Yet this time one stood open behind her, and Lucian did not ask her to stay. He only bowed his head as she passed. That restraint followed Rosamund up the stairs more powerfully than any command could have done. By nightfall, riders left Mayfair for Hampshire, Gray's Inn, and the houses of those respectable witnesses who had enjoyed the scandal when it cost them nothing. At Alder-mere Hall, candles would soon be lit in the great drawing-room. This time the house would not preserve silence. It would be made to hear. Alder-mere Hall had never looked less like a home than it did on the afternoon. Truth was invited to sit in its great drawing-room. The Hampshire house rose out of pale winter light, with its stone front washed clean by rain, its windows bright, and its lawns stretched toward the village as if nothing within those walls had ever been hidden. Rosamund arrived first, not because Lucian delayed, but because she wished the house to receive her before it received his apology. Mrs. Bell met her in the hall with the household keys already hanging from a ribbon of dark blue silk. The steward bowed. The rector, old Mr. Ellison, stood near the hearth with grief in his kind face, because good men often discovered scandal only after women had paid for silence. Harcourt arranged papers on a long table. Silas Venn placed the recovered packet from Gray's Inn beside the half-burned account book. Lady Maud sat in an armchair upholstered in green damask, her spine very straight, her face composed into martyrdom. Octavia Fenwick stood near the window beside her mother, who had come to witness rescue, and now looked as though she had been trapped inside a lesson. Pike had been brought under Ven's supervision and placed near the solicitor. Watched by two sober estate men who looked at him with the disgust of people whose rents had been used as chess pieces by strangers, Lucian entered last. He wore black, without ornament, and carried Rosamund's wedding ring in a small velvet case. He did not take the central chair. He stood at the table until Rosamund looked at him. Only then did he begin. "You were invited because you heard some part of the scandal concerning her grace," he said. His voice filled the room without rising. "You will now hear the truth with equal attention." Lady Wrexham, who had travelled from Bath under the excuse of concern, lowered her eyes at once. Lady Crampton pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, perhaps from shame, perhaps from excitement, denied its usual comfort. Lucian opened the recovered packet. The forged letter that accused her grace of trading estate information was composed from samples of her handwriting supplied by Miss Octavia Fenwick. Those samples came from invitations and notes her grace had written in ordinary courtesy. Mr. Gideon Pike used them with access gained through the solicitor's copied estate accounts. Lady Maud Kersey paid Pike's debt and encouraged the use of the letter to turn suspicion upon my wife before she could expose the fraud. "I encourage discretion," Lady Maud said, "nothing more." Ven stepped forward and laid down Pike's written statement, the debt note, and the stationer's ink receipt. "The documents say more." Pike's voice came thinly from his chair. "Lady Maud told me the Duchess was too quiet to fight," Miss Fenwick said. "His Grace wouldn't ask questions if the letter struck his pride first." A small sound moved through the room. Lucian did not look away from the papers. They were right about one thing. I did not ask the questions I should have asked. Lady Maud's face hardened. "Lucian, no good can come of humiliating yourself before people who already wish to talk. Good did not come of protecting my pride either." He turned then, not toward his aunt, but toward Rosamund. She stood beside the table with her hands folded, no ring on her finger, no softness borrowed for anyone's comfort. Her Grace came to my study with proof in her hands. She had marked false rents, copied signatures, ink discrepancies, and payments that had been made to appear corrupt. I listened instead to a forged letter and to my aunt's interpretation of my wife's character. I believed accusation because accusation suited my fear. I believed silence meant weakness because I had never troubled myself to learn what her silence protected. The words seemed to strip rank from him one layer at a time. No one moved. Even the fire burned quietly. "On the night her Grace left my house," Lucian continued, "she heard me curse the day she entered it. Those words were mine. No villain forged them. No aunt placed them in my mouth. I spoke them, and they were false." Rosamund felt the room turn toward her, not with hunger this time, but with the uneasy respect people show when a private wound becomes public fact and refuses to behave like entertainment. Lady Maud rose. "This is madness. You would give society a rope and invite it to hang the family name." Rosamund looked at her. "No, you used the family name as rope. We are cutting it down." The rector made a low sound of approval before hiding it in a cough. Octavia took a step forward, her face bright with desperation. "I never meant for her Grace to be ruined. I only wanted the truth of her position known." Everyone knew she was unsuited to Alder-mere. Lucian turned on her with controlled contempt. "No, Miss Fenwick. Everyone knew only what careless rooms allowed themselves to assume. Her Grace protected tenants whose names you would have fed to gossip. She paid arrears from her own allowance. She preserved accounts I neglected to examine. She kept this house honorable while I allowed honor to be described to me by people who wanted power." Octavia's mother made a strangled whisper. "Octavia, be quiet." But Octavia was already silenced by the one punishment she had never imagined: being seen clearly without being admired. Harcourt spoke next, concise and grave. Pike would be turned over through proper legal channels for forgery and fraud. Rusk of Gray's Inn had surrendered the copies and named Pike as the buyer. Dr. Finch had withdrawn any willingness to speak of her Grace's nerves and had written an apology for presuming upon rumour. Lady Maud's access to Alder-mere accounts, correspondence, and household authority was ended. She would remove to her dower residence in Northumberland within the week, with an allowance fixed by Lucian, and no authority over the duchess, the servants, or the estate. Lady Maud looked at Lucian as if seeing not a nephew but an enemy finally born. "You exile me for defending you. I remove you for betraying my wife." His voice did not shake. "Do not mistake the distance between those acts." Lady Maud's mouth trembled once, more from rage than sorrow. "She will not forgive you merely because you have staged a noble confession." The cruelty landed because it was aimed well. Lucian accepted it without flinching. "Forgiveness is not owed to me. Truth was owed to her." That answer changed Rosamund more than any defense had done. It did not heal. It did not erase the corridor, the closed door, the ring left behind in the grey hour before dawn. But it made a space where healing could someday begin, without requiring her to pretend nothing had been broken. Lucian opened the velvet case and took out the wedding ring. A murmur stirred, then died when he did not approach her. He placed the ring on the table between them. "This belongs to you," he said. "Not because I claim you, not because this room expects a pretty ending after an ugly truth, because I should never have made my name a place where you were unsafe." Rosamund looked at the ring. She remembered the chapel, his steady hand, her young hope trained to be modest. She remembered leaving it on the dressing table, because gold could not hold what trust had lost. "I will not put it on because a room is watching," she said, "nor because you have spoken well. I know, do you?" He lifted his eyes. "I know enough to be afraid of easy forgiveness." The room waited. Rosamund let it wait. For once, no one hurried her pain toward a shape more convenient to witness. She picked up the ring, closed her hand around it, and did not place it on her finger. "Forgiveness cannot be commanded," she said. "Respect can be practiced. Truth can be kept. Doors can be opened before judgment speaks behind them." Lucian bowed his head. "Then I will begin there." Rosamund turned to the witnesses. "You have heard what was said of me. You have heard what was done. If any of you repeat the first without the second, you do so knowingly." Lady Wrexham blushed. Lady Crampton lowered her handkerchief. The rector smiled faintly, not at the discomfort, but at the justice of discomfort properly placed. The reckoning ended not with applause, but with chairs pushed back carefully, and people leaving under the weight of what they could no longer pretend not to know. Pike went with Ven. Octavia was led out by her mother. Lady Maud paused at the door, as if expecting someone to ask her to stay. No one did. When the room had emptied of all but Lucian and Rosamund, the great house seemed to breathe differently. The fire settled. Rain touched the windows. Rosamund opened her hand and looked at the ring resting against her palm. "My mother's pianoforte," she said. Lucian looked up. "It is in the music room. I would like to hear it." "Of course." He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back, waiting for her to lead. Rosamund walked first, carrying the ring but not yet wearing it. While behind her, the room that had once held lies remained lit for anyone who cared to remember where truth had finally been spoken. The music room at Alder-mere Hall had been closed for so long that Rosamund expected dust, silence, and the faint reproach of things neglected. Instead, when Lucian opened the door and stepped aside for her to enter first, she found candlelight waiting. Not a blaze arranged for display, only enough soft flames to warm the polished wood, the faded rose curtains, and the square of winter-dark window beyond which the lawns fell away toward the village. Her mother's pianoforte stood near the far wall. Rosamund stopped just inside the threshold. It had been repaired. The cracked ivory key was no longer forced back into place, as though damage could be hidden by pressure. It had been set in a narrow silver frame upon the music rest, preserved openly, its split edge visible beneath the candlelight. In the instrument itself, a new key filled the gap, pale and smooth, but not pretending to be the old one. Lucian remained by the door. He did not watch her as if waiting for gratitude. He watched the floor near her feet, as though even his gaze required permission. "When?" she asked. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "The day after Bath," he said. "I sent to Mrs. Annesley for the tuner she trusted." She refused to send him until I wrote that the broken key would not be discarded. A small breath left Rosamund, almost a laugh and almost grief. That sounds like her. She also wrote that if I made a sentimental display of it, she would come to Hampshire and remove the key herself. She would. Rosamund crossed the room. The ring lay still in her palm, warm now from the heat of her hand. She set it gently on the edge of the pianoforte and touched the silver frame. The broken key looked exactly as she remembered it. Not beautiful in the way society used the word, not whole, still present. I thought you might replace everything, she said. I nearly did. Lucian's honesty came quietly. I thought repair meant making the damage invisible. Then I realized that was how I had treated half my life. My father's ruin, my aunt's control, our marriage. I kept polishing the surface and calling it strength. Rosamund looked toward him, and now he lifted his eyes. Now I would rather learn where the cracks are before I put weight upon them. The answer did not ask to be forgiven. That was why it reached her. She sat at the instrument. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and for a moment she was back in Bath, above the bookbinder's shop, playing loneliness into a room too small for pride. Then she was a girl at her mother's side, learning that music was not the art of striking notes, but of listening for what came after them. Her first chord trembled, not from fear, from memory. The pianoforte answered more warmly than the Bath instrument, deeper, older, and full of a house that had finally been made to hear. She played the piece she had written in hiding. The beginning was spare, each note separated from the next by a distance that once had felt like corridors, separate breakfasts and closed doors. Lucian did not move. He stood where she had left him, neither outside the room nor too near her shoulder. The melody shifted. It reached the passage where she had always stopped in Bath, because she had not known how to go on without turning sorrow into pleading. This time she did not stop. She changed one note, then another. The lonely phrase opened not into triumph, but into steadiness, a homecoming without surrender. When the last sound faded, Rosamund kept her hands on the keys. Silence followed, but it was not the old silence. It did not accuse, it waited. I heard you in Bath, Lucian said. At the recital. I knew. You knew not at first. But afterward, I understood why the room felt different. You listened without taking the music from me. He stepped one pace farther into the room. I should have entered rooms where you were long before you left one. Yes, she said. No cruelty. No softness. Truth, he accepted it. Rosamund, I will not ask you to promise a feeling tonight. I will ask only what terms would make this house safe enough for you to remain while feeling returns or does not. She turned on the bench to face him fully. Open ledgers. Not because I suspect every account, but because secrecy served those who wish to use us. Done. Mrs. Bell answers to me in household matters, not to any relative who finds my authority inconvenient. Done. Mary Bower and Tamsin are protected. Tamsin's name is not to be spoken in connection with the fraud, already arranged with Harcourt and Venn. Her lessons may continue under your patronage if you wish, without explanation. Rosamund nodded once. The tenants' relief fund will be formal, not hidden inside pin money. I will manage it with the steward. Yes, Lady Maud does not return to this house without my invitation. Lucian's answer came without hesitation. She will not. Octavia Fenwick is not to be received under any roof where my name carries authority. She has already discovered that doors close more quietly than rumors open. There was no satisfaction in his voice, only consequence. Rosamund looked at the ring on the polished wood, and between us, he went still. She had asked the one question rank, law, household order, and public justice could not answer for them. No closed doors when truth is required, she said. No judgment spoken where I cannot answer it. No protection that cages me for my own good. No apology used as a debt I must repay with tenderness. Lucian bowed his head. Yes, and you will not call distance peace. His eyes lifted, and something in them broke with quiet recognition. No. I won't. The contraction startled her faintly, not because it was improper, but because it sounded like a man rather than a title. She looked back at the keys. Then I will remain at Alder-mere for now. He did not move, for now is enough. Not as the woman who left before dawn. No. Not as the wife you lost and recovered. No. As the woman who chooses the terms of her own return. Lucian's voice was low. As the woman I should have seen before I feared losing her. Her throat tightened, but she did not look away. Do not make poetry of it too soon. For the first time in many weeks, a faint, real smile touched his mouth and vanished before it could presume. I will try to be plain. Plainness will do. Outside the music room, footsteps approached, then stopped. Mrs. Bell appeared at the open door and curtsied. Your Grace, Mr. Harcourt has departed. Mr. Venn sends word that Pike has been conveyed properly, and Lady Maud's carriage leaves at first light. Rosamund rose. Thank you, Mrs. Bell. The housekeeper's gaze flicked once to the ring on the pianoforte, then away with perfect loyalty. The household asks whether your Grace wishes supper served in the small dining room or the family parlour. It was an ordinary question. After all that had been spoken and exposed, its ordinariness nearly undid Rosamund. The house was not asking whether she had been restored for display. It was asking where she wished to eat. The family parlour, she said. And Mrs. Bell. Yes. Your Grace? Tomorrow, send a note to the village schoolmistress. I would like to discuss music lessons for girls whose families cannot pay. Quietly at first. Mrs. Bell's face softened. Very good, Your Grace. When she had gone, Lucian looked toward the open door. You begin at once. If I wait until no one is ashamed, nothing useful will ever be done. That sounds like something Mrs. Annesley would say. She would say it better. Rosamund picked up the ring. For a long moment she held it between her fingers, feeling its circle, its weight, its history. Lucian did not come closer. He did not breathe as if the next second belonged to him. That made the choice hers in a way it had not been on their wedding day, when witnesses had smiled and duty had disguised itself as consent. She slid the ring onto her finger herself. It did not heal the past. It did not erase Bath, the study door, or the cold words that had sent her into the mist. But it no longer felt like a lock. It felt like a promise she had rewritten before putting it back on. Lucian's eyes lowered to her hand. His face changed. And for one unguarded moment, she saw not a duke, not a penitent, but a man relieved so deeply that he did not know what to do with his hands. He bowed over hers without touching until she turned her palm slightly, granting him permission. Then, and only then, he took her hand with such care that the contact felt less like claim than gratitude. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me for giving you work to do, she replied. His thumb stilled against her glove. Then I will thank you for staying long enough to let me do it. They walked to the door together, but Lucian reached it first and opened it. He stepped back. The old gesture might have been politeness. This one was recognition. Rosamund crossed the threshold before him into the lit corridor, where servants moved quietly, not with gossip, but with the restored rhythm of a house that knew its mistress had returned by choice. In the days that followed, London learned to adjust its voice. Lady Wrexham repeated the truth with the same enthusiasm she had once reserved for scandal. Lady Crampton discovered a late but fervent admiration for the Duchess's fortitude. Dr. Finch wrote no more notes about nerves. Octavia found invitations missing from trays where they had once appeared reliably. Lady Maud left for Northumberland beneath a sky as grey as her silence, and no one at Alder-mere Hall stood at the door to wave her back. Weeks later, when morning light filled the music room, Rosamund played again, not for witnesses, not for defense, but because sound belonged in rooms once ruled by silence. Lucian sat nearby with his state papers open on his knee, waiting when she paused, listening when she began. The cracked ivory key remained framed above the instrument, not hidden and not worshipped. Broken things did not need to vanish to prove they had survived. The last note faded into sunlight. Lucian rose and opened the music room door. Rosamund looked at him, then at the bright corridor beyond. This time, she walked through first.